wasn't here. We'll see how your sub slash Julia did though. And we'll do Renaissance, exploration, Columbian exchange, mercantilism, Tokugawa, Japan. Hopefully we got enough time to do all that. We'll try. All right, let's start with the Renaissance. So this is actually the first period 2 topic. All right, so period 2, 1450 to 1750. All right, and we're going to start with the Renaissance, which means, anybody know?
Rebirth.
Yeah, rebirth of what? Of who? Europe, there you go. You're like, All right, they were stuck for a while. They were in a rut called the Middle Ages. The Enlightenment folks called it the Dark Ages. And they were stuck because they were more or less controlled by the Catholic Church. They were not unified under stable, centralized empires. So there was not a whole lot of innovation or security or economic development. It was mostly just try to live in your kingdom and try not to piss off the church, pretty much. However, a bunch of information is going to come back, trickle in through the 1300s and 1400s, especially the 1400s, as a bunch of old information is going to return. And I heard you cover it several times with Julia. But this old classical knowledge that's from Greece and Rome, there's a lot of things. So there's 2 primary qualities that you got to know. One quality is most of it is going to be relatively secular, which might be a new word for you. I'm not sure if they covered that. Secular means non-religious, all right? So they're not focused on Christianity and going to heaven, and they're not focused on the afterlife. They're focused on this life now. Anybody know why? Maybe the old ancient Greek writers and some of the early Roman writers wouldn't write about Christianity?
It didn't.
It didn't exist, right? So it's kind of hard for them to write about that. So a lot of the writings are going to be secular, and also we're going to get. We'll talk more about that one later in the year when we get to AP Euro. But also they're going to bring back an old way of thinking that was rooted in the Greeks and later the Romans.
Greco-Roman logic.
Yeah, skepticism was what I was going for, but yes, Greco-Roman logic. Right. Remind me of what skepticism is.
Thinking.
Not just thinking.
Questioning everything.
Yeah, you're questioning the authority figure. And I don't mean authority, like, yeah, I'm your teacher and technically I enforce the rules, but I mean authority as in knowledge. Like, your teacher is an authority figure in knowledge. That means they know what they're talking about. They know the subject. All right, so authority can mean, yeah, I enforce rules, but it can also mean, I have this set of knowledge, so you should listen to me because I know what I'm talking about. All right, so they're going to just basically question knowledge and authority on knowledge. And that's going to lead them down a road that eventually gets to the scientific revolution, which we'll briefly talk about here. Before that, though, as these things start trickling back into Europe, I want to know the 3 primary ways they did so. How did they do this? Can anybody name all 3?
The Silk Road trade.
Yeah, okay, so trade, Silk Road, Mongol Empire, reestablishing that in 1200s and 1300s. Trade, okay. What else?
The Crusades.
The Crusades, nice.
Black Death.
Black Death, that's not what brought back texts. That's what decimated the population and improved labor for the few that survived and living quality of life. There's a third one, though. It's actually a European, not civilization, but polity. It's a trade-based one in the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, okay, the Italians.
Yes, okay, mostly Venice, but yeah, so Mediterranean trade, basically. So Venice, they're going to be the primary instigators of this. But yes, a lot of trades are coming through the Mediterranean with the Arab world, and those documents and knowledge are going to trickle in. That was left there long ago by Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Empire. If you remember way back to like Unit 0 when we briefly talked about the first week, the Greeks went through and built libraries and put their Greek knowledge into all these cities throughout North Africa and the Middle East and even into Persia and Central Asia. So that's where it was preserved because they lost it in Europe. And that's going to trickle back through that means from those areas. Okay, cool. Quick about the Crusades, though. I feel like probably nobody told you about what the Crusades are, correct? Oh, so you know the basics then. Okay, well, I'll just go over the basics real quick then. Crusades, this area is the focus. This is where three major monotheistic religions originate: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And all three religions want to either control or have access to it. So in the 11th century, so the thousands to, I think the last crusade was like 1291 or 1295, something like that, to basically 1300. You're going to have a series of crusades from the Europeans as they're going to put together what they can as far as forces go, commissioned by the Pope, and they're going to invade, and they're going to occupy territory there. They actually chase out a lot of the Muslim empires that are present, forces that are present, and they're going to hold on to decent chunks of territory for a couple hundred years before they run out of funding and the Muslims sort of unite and chase them out. But why would we care about that? How does that impact European history, except for the fact that it makes Muslims and Christians dislike each other even more?
Attention Spartan students, Christopher Romero, please come to the office. Christopher Romero, please come to the office.
Oh, she's done. Okay.
They brought back some of the skepticism that was in the area.
Yeah, some of the knowledge and documentation they came across, in Jerusalem, those other cities, Antioch, etc., and they would bring it back. So those are all ways that it's going to trickle back in. Okay, cool. So a lot of that gets in, but this trade that's established is also going to bring things besides knowledge back. It's going to bring some technologies and some, I guess you would say, production methods. All right, there's one that's really important. Because they're going to turn this knowledge into the printing press. All right, and who's going to be my inventor of the printing press in the 1400s?
Johannes Gutenberg.
Yeah, Hans Gutenberg. So he is going to, I believe the print technology, the ideas behind it came from China, but they didn't make a printing press, at least not like he did. He's the one that finalizes it into an actual printing press. So Gutenberg, in the, I believe it was the 1400s. I think it was the 15th century. We'll just write it to be safe. He's going to invent the printing press. Why do we care about this? Why does that matter?
It later spreads like the Martin Luther and scriptures.
Okay, later for the Protestant Reformation, super important. Yeah, definitely. We talked about that earlier this week. But before the Protestant Reformation, how was this thing already making an impact even in the 1400s?
Did a lot for the spread of vernacular language,
Yeah, okay, cool. So this is actually the equivalent of a communication revolution. So the latest one we've had would you probably say like the Morse code telephone was huge for us. Not us because we weren't alive yet. But then you also have the internet. That one we were alive for, or actually no, you guys weren't even alive when that became a thing. So you've always had the internet. But not even a generation ago, the internet's brand new, so that's a new way of communicating. The printing press is like that big back then, because it used to be you'd have to write things by hand. It would take forever to write anything. Now though, you just print a template, you make a template which takes a little bit, but you just keep printing pages. You just dip it in ink, boom, dip it in ink, boom, dip it in ink, boom. And you can make pages that are exactly the same very, 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 very quickly. All right, so this is a major development that's going to impact, yes, the Protestant Reformation, but even before that, the development of vernacular languages, which again are like formal, common ways of speaking. So all those dialects of English and Spanish and German are all going to be organized into a fixed grammatical set. So the way I'm speaking right now was not the way all English speakers spoke, several hundred years ago. But after we have some very influential literary figures come along and sort of establish a formal way of speaking and writing in English, we have that. So we've at least covered 3 examples of vernacular language that was established. So vernacular language, we've got English, we've got Spanish, we've got German. So let's go English first. Who's the guy that really codifies that?
And Shakespeare?
Yeah, Shakespeare. I mean, other people contributed too. I don't think it's just these guys, but they're the primary contributors, or at least initial.
For Spanish, Miguel Cervantes.
Yeah, Cervantes, all right. And for German,
Martin Luther.
yeah, Luther with his German publication of the Bible. Nice. So that's going to spread and develop languages, but more importantly, this is going to allow knowledge to spread much more quickly. So we get some ideas coming back, and now these ideas that have returned can now spread throughout all of Europe. So we've got many more people that have access to this. Information is actually critical when you're trying to develop an economy or technology or innovation or anything. So this is what causes Europe to sort of wake up. You have the whole rebirth thing, because they were just doing essentially nothing for 1,000 years except for just staying the same. But this influx of information and this ability to communicate, that's really going to allow them to expand their knowledge, and then later their economies, technology, all that stuff's going to follow. So this is like the trigger, right, that starts with the spark that starts it. All right, so you with me on the Renaissance and its significance? All right, sweet. So this, along with another development, is going to allow the Europeans to become super wealthy. All right, so this is going to enhance their knowledge and later innovation and technology. But another thing is going to make them rich and powerful. They're going to, well, what are they going to do? What's going to make them rich and powerful? What is this era I am referring to?
The age of exploration.
Yeah, age of exploration, correct. So let's first talk about why they're even doing that. So exploration, which is roughly late 15th to at some point in the 17th century, you'd probably say exploration ended. They hadn't charted the entire world yet, like a lot of Africa was uncharted and the Americas, but the phase where they pretty much claimed all the land they could at the time by the 17th century. So exploration. First off, though, we got to know why. Why do they have to find this? Well, they want to connect the Indian Ocean, all right, because that's where the money's at. And why do they need to like do this whole kooky exploration thing to find it? Like, why don't they just go trade it like everybody else?
Because of the Muslims?
Yeah, so there's two reasons why. They are blocked by the Muslim caliphates and sultanates, block Europeans. They are not friends, especially after the Crusades. All right, so most of this territory, which is the areas in which they would traverse, are blocked by either Sunni or Shia empires at some point. Okay, well, why can't I just do the Silk Road and connect with China like the old days?
The monks had already fallen.
Right, yeah, and so there's not really an established Silk Road anymore because the Mongol Empire that kept it running is no longer there, and that Silk Road also falls apart with it. So they've got to find their own way to get there. So they choose to sail, and there's two different ideas. Both of them work. One works better than the other, but both of them end up working. The Portuguese, over here on the Atlantic, their idea is to go around Africa, which is possible, and they do it. It takes them a while, but that's going to be their goal. So they're the first ones to start this, and they start sailing and charting the coast of Africa. Before we talk about who did it and how and all that, I need to know also, so this is their motivation, what technologies are going to, or innovations are going to allow them to do this? Because nobody, except for the Vikings, has really gone out and consistently explored on a large scale like this. So you could say that, you know, Zheng He did, and that's kind of at the same time, with the Ming Dynasty in the Indian Ocean, but no one's really just kind of gone out and charted, explored all this new territory and established connections with that, other than pretty much the Vikings. And maybe the Phoenicians before.
Caravels and Portland maps?
Yeah, okay, cool. So we've got portal and maps, which allow them to chart and, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not rediscover, but form routes, consistent routes, because I got to be able to go back to where I was for it to be a settlement. All right, so portal and maps. Who did the sub or Julia explain how portal and maps worked?
Yeah.
They did? Okay, with the compass and timing the sailing and all that? Okay, perfect. All right, just to summarize, you just use a compass to sail in a straight line, you time it, and that gives you a good idea of the distance. And they would just do that from various points, and they could make pretty accurate maps back then. They wouldn't look exactly like our maps now, but they were close. All right, what was the other one you said? Caravels, that's right. The much more efficient and quick ships that could go long distances, but also could maneuver well. In fact, they could maneuver super well. They could stop and turn much more quickly than other ships because they had an additional piece added to it. I don't know if this is in the notes or not. No, that's an older, although they do use those, that's an older, like, classical era invention. This is brand new. I believe it was Europeans that invented it. If not, they're the ones that popularized it.
I forgot the exact name, but isn't it like almost like a motor or whatever?
Close. All right, it's not a motor, but it does guide the ship. It's called a stern post rudder. And that's going to allow them to stop and turn much more quickly. So there's areas they can access more consistently that aren't as dangerous. Like if I'm just floating in by rocks, like it could just send me into the rocks. With the stern post rudder, they have a lot more control of the direction my ship is going. All right. Already mentioned the compass. Where's that come from?
China.
Yep, China. And how did they know how far north and south they were? They used a way, I believe the Arabs either invented it or popularized it, about how to know, based on the stars, how far north or south I was. Yeah, astrolabe, nice. And one last thing, no, actually, no, not the last thing. They also are going to catch onto a couple of wind patterns that help them explore through Africa and then eventually go across the ocean to the Americas. What are those two wind patterns?
The westerlies and trade.
Yeah, westerlies and trade winds. Yeah, there's a rough wind pattern. In fact, actually planes still use this because it's more fuel efficient. And it roughly goes down the coast of Africa, across the equator into the Caribbean, and then kind of goes back up to the United States and back over to the northern part of Europe. So those are the westerlies, those are the trade winds. And they're going to use those because the water's already flowing that way, makes a sailing ship much easier to travel with using those currents and those winds. Nice. All right. How were they able to conquer peoples of the Americas so well? I'm not talking about the disease yet. How were they able to conquer people of the Americas so easily, or the coasts of Africa or India, or wherever they show up at the time? What's the advantage they're going to have over most of these areas?
Gunpowder weapons?
Yes, they have much more developed gunpowder weapons. They exist elsewhere, at least around that time, but the Europeans, for whatever reason, is there metalworking or whatnot? Like some people think it's because they made so many church bells that they knew how to work with metal better, whatever it was. They're gonna master the cannon first, all right? And they're gonna put that on ships. That's a huge advantage. It used to be you could only take ships out by like running into them and boarding them and chopping people up, but no, now they can sink you before you even get close to them. That's never happened before. So, like the Battle of Ponto or Battle of Diu that we talked about, where they fight against the Ottoman Empire, in both cases, they're able to destroy much larger navies because they have these cannon ships. And more importantly, they can take over entire towns without invading. They can just sit off the coast and say, hi guys, go ahead and surrender or we're just gonna blow all your buildings up. And usually they say no, and then they blow some buildings up, and then eventually they surrender. So they can actually take over coastal towns. They can destroy ships before they even get close to them. This is a massive, massive, massive advantage over here in the old world when the Europeans get there. All right, cool. So guns and gunboats. Well, I should say cannon ships. Also, one thing that really catches the Native Americans off guard is going to be horses. They don't have those. So warriors on horses with guns, that's a no contest, even without the disease. Although they definitely needed the disease to do it because there's just way too many. They would have been outnumbered way too much. Not enough bullets, even if they could beat them. All right, and then horses. Cool. So, Portuguese, the first ones to start this. They start charting the coast of Africa. All right. Who's going to be funding this?
Ferdinand and Isabella.
Okay, they actually fund Columbus,
Oh,
which we'll
sorry.
get to. But who starts the funding? As far as I know, he's the first major contributor and funder of these voyages.
Henry the Navigator.
Yeah, Henry the Navigator, who actually didn't navigate himself, but whatever. He's going to fund a lot of these voyages for the Portuguese as they attempt to sail around Africa. Not as easy as it sounds, by the way. On a sailboat, I can't just sail around the tip of Africa here. The way that the winds and currents work, it'll just send you right back, as far as I know. So the Portuguese had to figure out this kooky way of catching different currents and then catching the Antarctic current to swing back up to actually get through and around it. They're actually going to protect that for like several decades. It's like punishable by death to tell anybody who's not Portuguese about it. But eventually, some Dutch kid that's like a hired hand on the ship like figures out how they do it, and then he like logs it and sends it to the Netherlands and England, and then everybody knows after that. But for a while, they protect that with their lives. All right. So who's the first person, by the way, to make this trip around and connect with India?
Vasco da Gama.
Yeah, Vasco da Gama. He's going to be the first European to make a direct connection with the Indian Ocean Trade Network. He actually, of course, sees the Swahili city-states before that, but he's going to be the one that connects with India, specifically Calicut and all that. All right. Before they get there, though, I kind of skipped a step on accident. they're going to establish the beginnings of their own maritime empire here in Africa, right? And just like I mentioned, because they have gunboats, they can sort of take whatever town they want, and they do that over here in Africa. And they're going to form this connection in these what are called trade post empires, because they don't go inland. They can't go inland. The empires are too big, or in this case, tropical disease will stop them and their horses from taking over. So they stick to the coasts. But what are the Portuguese going to establish here later that's going to be terrible, but very important for the development of the Americas later on?
The slave trade.
Yeah, the slave trade, right? So they're going to establish these port trade cities, this trade post empire, and the West African empires who have already been trading slaves, the Arabs, for 500 years. They're just going to say, oh, sweet, you're just a larger, richer group who shows up at our doorstep and wants to buy slaves, and they have plenty, and they go find more if they don't, by conquering other tribes or kingdoms and using those prisoners to sell as slaves. So West African kingdoms are going to be selling a lot of slaves to the Portuguese, who are going to bring them on over. Almost all slaves were put into Brazil and the Caribbean, and then only a few ended up, like 10% or less, ended up going to actually the United States. But anyways, get a little ahead of myself there. Vasco da Gama connects, Henry the Navigator funds a lot of expeditions. How do the Spanish, what's their strategy? So I want to know, yeah, it's Christopher Columbus, but like, what kind of sailors were hired for the most part, and why? Just before I even go to the Spain thing, I think you were first.
Italian sailors because they had previous knowledge of sailing.
Yeah, these Italian sailors, like Columbus, had already been sailing the Mediterranean for hundreds of years. Whether it's Venice or Florence or somebody else, they have experienced sailors, so they're the ones that they hire to go on these voyages. Columbus, of course, is Italian. But he was hired, somebody else already mentioned it, by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Right after they just united Spain, they just kicked out the last of the Moors, the leftovers of the Umayyad Caliphate that had been there, and united Spain. And they're going to fund Christopher Columbus. And that was a common theme, was using Italian sailors because they were experienced. You guys are doing good. Looks like Julia and the sub did a decent job, at least so far. All right, so where was I going with this?
What their strategy
What was that?
What their strategy was?
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. What was their intended strategy?
To sail around the world to get to India.
Yeah, and they're right, you can do that, but there's something in the way they didn't know about, which of course is the entire set of continents, that is the Americas. And that's actually the misnomer, the mislabeling of the peoples of the Americas. That's why they were called Indians, because he literally thought they landed in India when he got there. He's just like, oh, look, they're pretty brown, they must be Indian. So he named them Indians, they've been misnamed ever since. Of course, now they've adopted the name American Indian, which is more accurate, but yeah, that's how they got mislabeled by Christopher Columbus. Okay, so he establishes that connection, makes it back, and informs Spain, and others find out, so we get a lot more voyages going out there. But the first two empires to really set out, explore, and claim most of this territory is going to be, which I've already mentioned, Portugal and Spain. So Portugal is going to get a lot of these trade post empires. These aren't exact locations, by the way, I'm just randomly choosing them. In the old world, though, in Africa and Asia, they're pretty much going to be limited to just the cities on the coasts. So I think I already mentioned it, but why just the cities on the coasts in the cases of the Portuguese?
The land empires are too big compared to what they had.
Yeah, they didn't have nearly enough funding to send enough troops to try to take over an empire. And in some cases, like in Africa, tropical disease would either kill the Europeans or their horses, and they couldn't really go into the interior at all anyway. But they could take over towns by just blowing them to smithereens until they surrendered, which they did. All right, so we've got the Portuguese. They establish a, what type of empire? I think I said it already, but
Trade
yeah,
post.
trade post. So that's basically coastal cities and forts. All right. Now the Portuguese, this was the big joke for Europe initially. They have nothing to actually trade. Like all these places have like spices and silk and tea and porcelain, and the Europeans like, we have some wool. Oh, we already have wool. We have some bread. Oh, you already have bread. They didn't really have anything. I think one of the bigger things they had was honey. For whatever reason, not a lot of other areas had a lot of honey, but for the most part, the Europeans had almost nothing to trade. So how did the Portuguese go about making money? Because they had to make money off of doing this, and they did, besides the slave trade later.
They forced people and merchants in the Indian Ocean to pay a car tax.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like a trade tax. So they did one of two things. They either require you to pay them to use the ports and trade. That was called cartas or cartas. It's basically like a trade certificate or tax. And also, they would be the ones that would facilitate the trade, meaning they would be the ones that you hired to transport the goods. It wasn't their goods, but you were paying them as the middleman, kind of like how Venice did between Europe and the Byzantine Empire and the Mediterranean. All right, so they were the middlemen of the Indian Ocean trade network. All right, so that's the Portuguese, and they established that over here in the Indian Ocean. Spain, though, goes a much different route. What is their empire going to be like, and where, for the most part?
Conquest base,
Okay, meaning
meaning that they take the land
from who?
from the Incans and Aztecs.
Okay, and what's going to allow them to do that? Now, yeah, they have an advantage of horses and guns, but like I said, there would be way too many American Indians to take by force back then. There's something that's going to help them out and do that. Yeah, European diseases. All right, now they don't. It's not like chemical warfare or biological warfare, and they're doing this on purpose. It's on accident. They don't even know about immunities. But because these people have been separated from these people for 10 to 20,000 years, we had developed immunities to diseases we got from animals. So most of the diseases that plagued people back then, like smallpox, measles, etc., those weren't human diseases. Those were given to us by animals. So over time, lots of people had died from those, but the ones that lived had immune systems that were able to survive that disease. So after a few generations of people dying from smallpox or measles or whatever, the only people that are left are the ones that might suffer, but they're more likely to live. All right, so even though I get smallpox over here, I have an okay chance of living because for whatever reason, genetically, my immune system can fight it off. However, these guys never had any access to that. So when the Europeans come over with these smallpox and measles, which are already embedded in humans, and that Europeans are largely resistant to, the Native Americans have no resistance to it whatsoever. So it just wipes them out. Like 90+% died from this. Like the Spanish had no idea. They went into when they met the Aztec in Tenochtitlan, Montezuma II, they went in and they just basically met them and like, oh my gosh, we're never going to take this. There's like 200,000 of these guys and they're very militaristic and it's not going to happen. And they come back a few days later and like almost everyone's dead. They're like, oh, well now we can take it. So, and of course, as you guys already know, nobody liked the Aztec because they were so brutal to the people they conquered, sacrifices and enslavement and all that. So the Spanish were able to do it because of disease and the fact that the Aztecs did not have any friends. Similar to the Incans, when they take over them, disease wipes them out, and the Incans are already fighting each other, so they didn't have to do a whole lot. All right, so Spain. No, I'm running out of room. I'll just put it right here. Spain, conquest-based. And they're able to do that because of disease on accident, and also, I would say, internal conflicts. So those American Indians, whether they're Aztec or Incan, they either had a civil war going on, or everybody that was ruled by them just hated their guts and was waiting for them to be weak. And so they pounced on them. All right, cool. What areas? That's a tough question. I'll just give it to you. Spain is going to claim most of the Americas very quickly, like way faster than they can actually settle it. But Spain's going to claim a good chunk here, all the way up to eventually, by like 1763 or so, they're going to own pretty much all of this. Like just Spain. That's a huge amount of land, massive amount of land. Lots of resources there, silver, gold, all the new crops they come across. So Spain's going to become quite wealthy. And then Portugal is going to claim Brazil as well as their trade post empires. Now initially, there's a lot of competition between the two over who owns what, how much they could grab. But somebody's going to settle that dispute between the two and divide the world in half. Who's going to do that and what's it called?
The Pope.
The Pope? But what's it called?
The Treaty of Tordesillas.
Yeah, there we go. I was hoping you'd say tortillas. Somebody said that once on accident. I was just like, nice. All right, so yeah. It's going to be split. This competition is going to be split or ended by Treaty of Tordesillas. There's another treaty too that split it by the Philippines. I can't remember what the name of that treaty was though. It was a little bit later. Regardless, Treaty of Tordesillas. Man, the internet people are gonna hate me because there's no way they can read this. They just have to listen well. Treaty of Tordesillas is gonna be what sort of ends the competition between Spain and Portugal, both Catholic countries. However, there's 3 other countries that join the exploration fray, and they are at least partially Protestant or entirely Protestant. What are these 3 Atlantic states? Let's go somebody you haven't said that many. Yep.
Netherlands,
Netherlands, which are the Dutch. Who else?
England,
England
France.
and France. Nice. They're going to join a little bit late though. So what's open for claiming at this point?
The northern part.
Yeah, the northern parts of the Americas, right. So Britain's going to run in and get what is now, the eastern coast of the United States for the most part. They're also going to take Hudson Bay. Joke's on them, there's nothing there.
Yep.
Maybe there's oil, but they weren't using it back then. The French, they also have the Newfoundland area. The French are going to take either the St. Lawrence River, Great Lake area. That's going to be known as Quebec now, French Canada. We'll learn about that later in the year because they're actually trying to become their own country since the 1960s. They're French-speaking, French-cultured, and they do not like being a part of English-speaking Canada. Anyways, and then the Netherlands are going to, nudge in there wherever they can over time. All right. Is that pretty much all that was said about those Atlantic states initially? Okay. So what's going to happen over time is these 2 empires, the Portuguese and the Spanish, are going to decay. There's multiple reasons for that, which we'll go over, at least for Spain. But the people that are going to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, pick up the scraps and benefit are going to be mostly the British and the Dutch. The French will too, but mostly the British and the Dutch are going to benefit from this slow decay of Spain and Portugal. Like the Dutch and the British are going to take a lot of holdings in the Caribbean, which becomes super, super, super lucrative, wealthy because of the sugar trade. They're also going to take parts of Central America, like Panama, Belize, what is now Suriname, things like that, on these coasts. And the Dutch and the English are going to largely control the Indian Ocean pretty shortly as well. They're going to kind of kick out the the Portuguese over time there. All right, that's a long process though. That's like a 150 year process. So don't think it was just like, boom, they just went and took it. They just slowly crept and took those things away. So before I talk about how they did that, and mercantilism and all that, let's quickly talk about the Columbian Exchange, because it is a major topic on the AP World Test in the past. So you definitely got to know what it is and its impact. All right, so Columbian Exchange. It's a pretty simple one, actually. It's just the exchange of goods and animals and diseases between the Old World, which is Afro-Eurasia, and the New World, which is North and South America. All right, so what are some goods that Europeans were able to discover and bring back to the Old World that people were willing to pay a lot of money for, or were super calorie dense and boosted their population? I'll take either one. Go ahead and try to give me 2 for each person.
Corn, potatoes, and tobacco.
That was 3, but yes. Nice.
Beans and squash.
Nice, okay. You already got the important ones? No, there's one major one that Europeans really liked that also has a bunch of caffeine in it and got them addicted to it. Not coffee, by the way. Coffee's from the Old World. All the hands go down. No? Yeah, cacao. Nice. Cool. So, from the New World to the Old World, we have, there's a lot, but I'm going to list the most important ones. Ones that either made Europeans super rich because everybody wanted them because they were addicting, like chocolate or sugar or tobacco. Oh wait, no, I think sugar was actually already in the Old World, but they planted it there, so take that one back. Tobacco and chocolate, though, are New World goods, and they're super addictive. The nicotine and the caffeine in both, and just the fact that chocolate's so sweet, is going to be very addicting, very rare, very expensive, and it's going to make these Europeans really, really rich. Okay, cool. So, tobacco, corn, potatoes, all forms of them. What did I just mention? Oh, cacao, chocolate, or the root form of chocolate. And should we talk about anything else?
Tomatoes.
I mean the Italians like them, but that's not really going to change the population. But yes, the fact that tomatoes are in things is a result of this. Okay, these two, corn and potatoes, are going to actually increase the population here because they are calorie dense. They're relatively resistant to drought and other sorts of plagues that more easily kill other crops like wheat. So corn, a lot of that's going to be fed to their livestock and animals. So if I have more animals, that means I also have more milk and meat too, which is more food, which is more people. Potatoes, especially in China, sweet potatoes, they're going to boost population quite a bit. And in Northern Europe, it's really going to help them out until the 1800s when there's a famine and lots and lots and lots of people die. So that's how the population is going to be affected. We're going to have population growth in the old world. Why do we care about tobacco and cacao? What does that do for people in the old world besides taste good or be addictive?
It gets them rich.
It does get them rich. So the people that get a hold of this first, the Spanish for the most part, and then later, of course, the British and Dutch and even Portuguese, that's going to be a very addictive, very luxurious, expensive commodity that's going to make them very, very, very wealthy. So they'll bring it back and they'll sell it here in Europe and make a bunch of money, or they'll sell it to the African kingdoms that they're trading with, or anybody in Asia that they can connect with. And they finally have something people want. So they finally have goods that people want to trade for, right? So that's going to allow them to really expand their trade networks, I guess you could say. All right, and it is the first time too we have the first global trade network. I mean, there was some Vikings that brought lumber back from the Americas like 500 years earlier, but that had no impact. This is the first one that actually impacts populations. Okay, so those were mostly good, at least for people of the old world, especially the Europeans. What about the shift the other way of old world goods to the new world? Definitely some positives, but definitely some negatives too.
Disease, livestock, citrus fruit, bananas.
Let's stick to the ones that are that really impact those societies. Like those things taste great and they help against scurvy and all that. But like I'll say disease, very impactful because it wiped out 90% of the people in the Americas that were native to the region. Livestock, because that's going to allow them to utilize animal labor, domesticated labor, domesticated animals. What else? Slaves, that's a big one too, yeah. That's later, but yes. Sugar, that's a big one too. Not that it impacts the peoples of the Americas as much, but when they get over here and they've got all this open territory that's well watered because it's tropical regions and whatnot, sugar grows super well there. So they're going to take a lot of that sugar that would only grow in a few regions over here and grow it like crazy in the Americas. They're really going to commercialize it. Did I ever tell you what commercialize means? Okay, to sell for profit. Okay.
Grains and coffee.
Yeah, grains, cool. Yeah, we can cut it at that. So grains and coffee. So the things that are going to be brought over and produced and sold for gigantic amounts of money are going to be sugar and coffee. So these four are going to be like the staple commodities or goods, actually the luxuries, that is going to really, really start to enrich the Europeans. All right. There's also gold and silver too. The Spanish are going to find a couple very, very condensed or dense silver mines. One's in Peru. They find another one in Mexico and later in Nevada. I believe the Peru one was first. It was almost, they called it just a silver mountain because there was so much in it. I think they're still mining it, not like they were before, but I think there's actually still some silver in there that they're extracting. Obviously Peru is doing it now, not the Spanish. But yeah, so we've got silver, gold. All of these are going to impact the economies and populations of the various regions. So obviously here, the impact is going to be mass, not extinction, but mass death. So population is going to decrease. That's the impact there. What happens to population here? Why?
Calorie-dense food.
Calorie-dense foods, right? And then, of course, more food for their animals, too. All right. And who's enriched the most by this?
Spain.
Okay, but I was going for Europeans, but you're right. Initially, for sure, it's going to be Spain. But yes, Europeans just in general. Spain at first, but all the others can be enriched by this as well. Cool. So you guys understand the Columbian Exchange? All right. So what I'll probably do is explain. I'll probably explain now. We got another 15 minutes left. I'll explain mercantilism and triangular trade and the encomienda system. And then I'll only have a couple more topics to talk about tomorrow, and then we'll focus on this week's content for the rest of it, so you guys have a refresher with the quiz on Friday. Question?
What about Shikaku?
What?
What about Shikaku in Japan?
Yeah, no, that's what we'll cover tomorrow briefly. The only topics we'll have left is Tokugawa, Japan, and then a little bit about mercantilism. Maybe I'll explain the whole thing, I don't know. All right, cool. So, moving on. Columbian exchange. So, that's going to enrich the Europeans. And what topics did I say I was going to cover? Mercantilism, triangular trade, and encomienda system. That's right. Okay, cool. So we'll do encomienda first because that's chronologically more accurate. So the Spanish get over here, right? And they're going to be like, they're going to realize the opportunity they have. They can really harvest a lot of these crops that are already over there or that they're bringing over to make money. They can mine the silver and the gold. There's a lot of money to be made, but they need a ton of labor, right? We don't have machines back then. It's just, it's going to be animal labor or human labor. And if it's complicated, it's going to be human labor. All right, so initially, they're going to be using these Native Americans that are there. But first, let's talk about how they took over, I guess I would say. So did you talk about conquistadors at all? Okay, cool. So there's a bunch, but there's the primary two that I want you guys to know. So Spain is going to, of course, conquer and settle a lot of this area, but they're not rich yet. So it's not like Ferdinand Isabella can send the Spanish army over and take over a bunch of territory. They're going to rely on a bunch of basically motivated, risky, single men to do it. All right, so these are guys with no families that probably aren't really well liked because they're so willing to leave their civilization and risk their lives to go explore, settle, and conquer an area. So these are people who are what you would consider maybe almost like middle or upper middle class today. They're like lower nobility. So they're not nobles that have a lot of power or authority or prestige, but they're not peasants either. So these are, I guess you'd say, lower nobility. Not for long though. And they're going to be called conquistadors. All right, and the examples I gave you, what were the two examples I gave you? You guys remember? Cortez is the one that conquers the Aztec. Pizarro conquers who? Inca Empire. All right, so, and that's just two examples of many. We'll stick with them though. So we had Pizarro and Cortez. So Aztec and Inca. And like we already mentioned, they're they're aided by the fact that disease wreaks havoc on the populations, and then most of these empires have a bunch of internal civil war or discontented populations that are going to make it easy to do. Here's the kicker though, and this is why they're so motivated to do it, especially after the success of Cortez and Pizarro right off the bat, is when they conquer this land for Spain, because they pretty much did it on their own dime. They got some funding from others, from the monarchs, but not much. It was pretty much just them and the soldiers they hired and had with them. So the reward was, what do you think the reward was?
Land.
Yeah, they get the land there, and they're made the lords of those territories. So that land grant, and they're massive, by the way, that they get, have control of the people there, and they also have control of the resources there. So that's going to be a major motivation for lots more conquistadors to come out and try. Most of them end up failing because they like show up and then march off in a direction to conquer it, and then all they find is like desert and they die. But some of them succeed. All right, so the reward is land grants. I would actually say estates, because they're actually technically made like nobles. And this system in which they're granted land and titles is known as the encomienda system. Yeah. All right, encomienda system. So the title for these conquistadors, who are lords of this area, are called encomienderos. Sorry. And they're technically the feudal heads of the estate, manorial lords, and the natives that are underneath them are supposed to be under their protection. They're supposed to do two things: protect them and convert them to Christianity, sometimes by force. So they do that, but there's going to be a bunch of individual mines and plantations and things like that on these encomiendas that are going to generate a lot of wealth for them and for Spain. What are those called?
Haciendas.
Haciendas, yeah. Nice, okay. Haciendas, and these are going to be, of course, driven by human and animal labor, mostly human. And they start out with, well, the Incans already have a good system. They have the Mita system, so they're like, well, we'll just use this. It's already organized. So they start using the Mita system in the Inca Empire, and they basically just use American Indians to do a lot of the labor. But that doesn't last long. Why doesn't that last long?
Disease.
Yeah, disease. Their population gets decimated. So very quickly, they have to shift from using the Mita system and American Indian labor to finding other means. So one of the first ones they try is hiring poor whites to do it. So we got people in Europe that want to get the hell out of there because it's too crowded, or there's too much disease, or there's not enough economic opportunity, or there's religious wars, or all of the above. So they want to escape so they don't, well, suffer and die. But they don't have money. They can't get over here. How are they going to afford their trip across the ocean? And then, of course, what are they going to be called?
Indentured servants, and they like essentially pay off for their trip by working in the.
Yeah, they're kind of like a voluntary slave. It's not as bad as a slave because they don't own you, but you essentially contract years of labor. So it's like, we'll pay for your trip, but you have to work for us for free for 7 years or whatever, right? And that kind of works. Indentured servitude. But it's tough, especially when the English try using it up here, because Europeans look very similar, right? They're all, like any ethnic group, the skin tones between them are relatively similar. So it's pretty easy to go to an area that has very few people in it, very little what you would call maybe police or government, and to keep people there, because they could just leave. I'd be like, I get over there and I'm working on your farm or your plantation or whatever, and then I just walk off one day. Is it going to be easy to track me down? No, there's no roads or documentation or police force, and there's just hardly any Europeans over there yet at all. So many of them would be like, all right, peace, and they would just go somewhere else out of their range and start their own farm or encomienda or plantation or whatever. Hacienda, not encomienda. So that was a big problem. A lot of these indentured servants would just peace out and then go make up their own farm or whatever later on in another area. However, they found a workaround. Their workaround is the, of course, terrible development of bringing over West African slaves. And again, they didn't like apprehend them for the most part. They were sold to Portuguese merchants and slave traders from these African kingdoms. And the Portuguese then brought them over. They would compact them in these ships like sardines. Many of them would die from complications, dehydration, disease, all kinds of factors led to their death and dismemberment. So what was this treacherous voyage across the Atlantic called when they were packed in like sardines like this? Middle Passage, right. So it's going to be replaced here with West African slaves. And that journey is known as the Middle Passage. And that's going to fuel a lot of these, of this need for human labor. Most are going to stay here in Brazil, in Portuguese Brazil, working on coffee plantations and things like that. Another large portion are going to go to the Caribbean to work on sugar plantations, because they're all very labor intensive. And then, like I said, about 10% or less end up eventually going to the United States, or what is now the United States. And that is the slave trade. All right. So where we get the name Atlantic system or triangular trade is it's not just a one-way arrangement, right? So you do have the purchasing of slaves from West Africa and bringing them over to work here in the Americas. But it doesn't end there. What's the next step of this? So you bring over slaves to work, you make more stuff, you make more profit. What goes on?
You sell the stuff.
Yeah, that stuff goes back to Europe to be sold, and then they make more money. You make more money too. And then what do they do with this money and this profit?
Buy more slaves.
They buy more slaves, right. And now we have, I know my map doesn't look very good for it, we have what's called triangular trade because it's a process. It's a three-point, it's almost like a circular thing, but it's a triangle, because it keeps going in this direction and growing and growing and growing. More slaves go over, more stuff's made, more profits made when they sell it, and they buy more slaves, and they keep that process going for a few hundred years, a little over 200 years. So that is what we call the Atlantic system, or triangular trade. We got that? Cool. Now let's just do, I won't do Mercantiles, we'll do Mercantiles tomorrow. Let's just talk quickly about the Spanish racial caste system, because that's another big topic on AP World. They love topics like that, where you have like, I don't know, oppression or racial issues. So we always talk about them, so we know them. Okay, so the Spanish. This is not going to be incorporated in non-Hispanic territories, at least not like this. Not so explicitly and definitively. But in the Spanish territories, and the Portuguese too, but mostly Spanish, we have what's called the Spanish caste system. Now if you guys remember, the caste system in India is like a hierarchy, right? And how do you move in that hierarchy? Not in your lifetime, right? You can't move, essentially. It's the same here. But instead of them basing it on social class or your job, they base it almost completely on the pigmentation of your skin. All right? There's one exception, of course, it's Europeans that come over from Europe. But for the most part, this is a racial caste system in which you are either denied or given opportunity based solely on your parents and how you look, for the most part. All right? So again, it's a racial caste system. And it's going to be fixed, right? Because you, at least back then, you couldn't change the color of your skin and your appearance. So whatever you're born with, that's your class. That's at least your spot in the tier in the hierarchy, and you're stuck there. All right, so it's a fixed social hierarchy. All right, I can't change. I was born into it, which is a terrible system. But anyways, so any system that's fixed like that, whether it's race or social class or religion, it's just it's a terrible idea. It's not how humans actually function. All right, so at the very top, now while they might not be any darker or lighter than some of the people on this list, they are still put at the top. Now these are Spanish or Portuguese people that were born in Europe that came over. All right, so the issue is where they were born for some reason. All right, so that's the very top. These guys have all opportunities. They're going to have first claim to all positions of power in the military, in politics, whatever. And what are they called here at the top? Peninsulares, yeah. Right, and those are Europeans born in Europe. Because for some reason that makes you better. I don't know how. I don't know any of these things they thought were better, but this one's particularly confusing. It's the same race, just born in a different spot. Anyways, below them are Europeans born in the Americas. All right? Yeah, Creoles. So that's Europeans born in Americas. All right, and now we start getting more complicated, and it's almost solely based on your pigmentation at this point. It doesn't matter where you were born necessarily. All right, so just below them, you're going to have the mix. This isn't, by the way, this isn't every single tier, but it's the primary ones. So below them is going to be a mix between Europeans and Native Americans, known as mestizos. Yes. European Native American mix. All right, and below that is going to be, actually I can't remember if it's, no. Yes, so that's going to be European and Black African mix. All right, I wasn't sure if the Native American came before that or not, but yeah, so mulatto, that's going to be European and African. All right, and then below that it's going to be Zombos, which is the Native American and African mix. And that's more or less their tier. Now they did shove, from what I remember anyway, a pure-blooded Native American, and I believe the very bottom was a pure-blooded West African slave. But that's going to be the caste system. And the reason why we know about this, number one, is, don't put your stuff away yet. The reason why we need to know about this is not only is it an example of an oppressive racial hierarchy, which it totally is, which is the Enlightenment's just going to annihilate later on. But we care about this because there's a particular group that is, well, they're all oppressed except for the Peninsulares, but there's one group that feels particularly upset by this hierarchy because they're the same race as the Peninsulares, but they're just born in a different spot. And as time goes on, there's going to be more and more and more and more of them and less and less and less of them. And then, of course, the Creoles. So, what you need to know is that as time goes on and more European families settle over here in the Spanish regions, like, did they go back to Europe?
No.
No, they stay there and they increase their population. So as time goes on, I have like ridiculous ratios of like 10, 20, 30 to 1 of Creoles outnumbering these Peninsulares. All right, and they're going to be like, why the hell are you guys in charge? Like, I've been here for generations. I don't even know what Spain looks like. I've never seen the king. I don't care about him. Why do I have to pay taxes to him and listen to you just because you were born there? All right, so that's going to later on in AP World inspire a lot of nationalistic revolutions. It's being led by this Creoles group who basically are tired of listening to people and a king they've never heard of, been to, and are an ocean away for no reason other than that's where they were born. So we're going to have a lot of nationalistic revolutions from roughly 1820, starting in Mexico, till the 1830s, where basically Spain and Portugal are, well, at least in the Spanish territories, they're kicked out of this entire area, and new countries are formed like Argentina, Gran Colombia, Mexico, etc. And that's going to be started by this Creole group. Guys, you got it?
Yes.
Mbola. Oh, Sokoku, yeah, I'll look at that too. I'm gonna do Merkelism first, and then I'll do, because that kind of explains why they're in Japan, and then all of a sudden the Europeans, and then we'll talk about Japan and the Sokoku era. So, Europeans, we talked about colonization as far as Spain and Portugal, the empires they have, and then English, Dutch, and French following. So there's a new economic strategy that they're gonna be using, a new economic system, and it's known as mercantilism. And it's contributed to by several people and ideas. One of the people that kind of gets credit for it is this guy named Jean-Jacques Colbert. He's in France. He's the finance minister for Louis XIV, by the way, who we'll review later next week, I think. And the whole system is going to be based on the idea that there's a limited amount of money or wealth in the world. That I get kind of nervous when subs cover economic concepts with the or Julia, but any idea what it's called, what kind of wealth system it is? If there's one that they include as a
Fixed wealth.
yeah, there we go. Good. It's a fixed wealth system. So fixed wealth. In capitalism, which is the system after this, we find out that you can actually create wealth with labor and investing and loans and all sorts of tricks. But at this point, they believe that the only way to get money is to literally get it yourself. Like, there's a certain amount of gold and silver and goods out there, and so when I accrue this wealth and this capital and this money, that's all that there is. So the whole goal is for each country to do what, do you think, if there's a fixed amount of money out there?
Control the wealth.
Yeah, they want to control as much of that wealth as possible. All right, now, I mean, everybody wants to get rich, but they don't believe you can kind of create your own. They think you have to kind of steal it from other people, essentially. All right, so the whole goal of this is going to be to establish a system of taxation. So the state's going to control a lot of these industries, and tariffs, which are a different type of taxation. Were you told what tariffs are?
Taxes on
Taxes on
commerce.
import.
Taxes on imports, right? So imports are things coming into your country from somebody else. So like, if you're buying a Mercedes, that's a German car, that's not made here. It's made in Germany or somewhere else, and it's going to be brought here. That's an import, all right? But if we make stuff here like furniture in the United States, and we send that off to India, what would that be an example of? An export. Good, we got that. All right, so the whole goal here is to establish tariffs so your country is selling more things to other countries and buying less things from them. Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to sell more, like if I'm Britain? Why would I want to be selling more things than I'm buying from France? Why would I want to do that? What's the whole point of that one?
Profit.
Okay, profit, but link it to mercantilism, because obviously you always want to trade things and sell things, 'cause that's profit. But like, why are they so concerned about not buying anything from anyone else and only selling things?
So they don't give their wealth to somebody else.
Right, so they think it's a fixed wealth system. If they're buying anything from other people, then that's bad for them. They see it as a loss, right? So they want everything to be made and purchased inside of Britain or sold outside of Britain. They do not want to buy anything from other people, essentially. So you guys understand that concept at least? All right, so how do these tariffs help them do that?
Discourages people from buying stuff from other places
Why? Or I should say how?
because they tax them. They don't want to get taxed.
Okay, like what does it do though? I mean, if I'm going to buy, you're not wrong, but I want a more clear description of that.
So like whenever you buy, like if you have two things that are, one's from a different country, one's from yours, you can
Uh-huh.
say, your home country's is going to be much cheaper compared
There
to
you go.
that.
It's an incentive, or in this case, a disincentive. So yes, you don't want to buy things because of the tax, but the tax makes it more expensive. So like, you can use any example. Let's say it was cheese. All right, so they made cheese in Britain and cheese in France. So there, what would normally be maybe, I don't know, $10 per whatever, not percent. What, a wheel of cheese? What do you even call cheese units? I don't even know. Let's say a wheel of cheese costs $10 just to make. All right, so then I've got my British one and my French one, or my English one and my French one. All right, so that's the same. So the English government doesn't like that, right? This is going to be a state-controlled economy, or at least mostly. That was Colbert's big idea. So what's the government going to do about this price debacle here? Because you could buy whichever one you wanted because they're about the same price. What is the government going to do about that? How are they going to fix this cheese industry problem that they have?
They just make the other one more expensive.
How?
Taxes.
Yep. What's that called again if it's on import?
Wait, what? Tariff?
Yeah, a tariff, exactly. So they might put a massive tariff on French cheese. So let's say it's a $10 tariff per wheel, and that now makes the French cheese, if you're going to buy it in England, $20. So which one am I going to buy if I'm a regular English person? You're going to buy the $10 one, right? Because it's half the price, right? Now, if I'm more wealthy, I could buy whatever. It is how it is. But that's going to really discourage people from buying goods from other countries. Now, I made up the example about cheese, but you can apply it to any commodity or any industry, and that's what they were trying to do. And every country was trying to do this. These are called tariff wars, by the way. Not that they're fighting each other, although they are, but not that they're fighting about these tariffs, but I mean, if I'm France and I know that England just put a tariff on my cheese so that I'm going to sell less cheese to England, what's France going to do in return?
Put a tariff on.
They're going to put a tariff on English cheese, right? So that's what we call tariff wars. That actually hurts everyone, by the way, because now, you probably didn't get this example, but I'll explain it to you. If I'm a peasant, and let's say, or I don't know, a blacksmith, whatever I am, let's say I only make $100 a month. All right, I'm going to simplify it here. Obviously, make more than $100 a month, but let's say I make $100 a month. And if I want to buy a month's worth of cheese, that used to be $10. Okay, and I could have my pick, right? And then I have another $90 to buy things like, I don't know, bread, coal or firewood. What else would they buy? Clothes. Actually, they probably make them, but whatever. These are all these things that they're going to be buying. And let's say they're all around $10, right? And I got choices between, English bread and Spanish bread and Portuguese bread and all these different choices, right? But instead of all these things being as cheap as possible, some of them are not going to be accessible. So for example, let's say for these clothes from England are $10, right? But let's say I could buy clothes from, well, we'll just say France. France, and these ones are actually $5. They're cheaper, or India, or whatever. All right, France. So obviously, any regular person's going to say, yeah, screw the $10 clothes. I'm going to save my $100 here, or at least 5 of them, and buy the French clothes, right? So they were spending $15 on these two things. So if I'm going to buy these two things in a month as a peasant, if I buy my clothes and I buy my cheese, I'm spending, if I buy the cheap ones, $15, right? Okay. All right, that's nice. So we got a tariff on French cheese. All right, that doesn't change my prices, but now I can't buy the French cheeses. Now it's $20, and that's a lot of my money. That's like 10% of my money. So I can't even buy the French cheese now. But here's the big problem. What if the French clothes that were cheaper now get a tariff? And let's say they add $10 to this with a tariff, and now it's $15 for French clothes. How does it impact Mr. Peasant here, who makes $100 a month? It's more expensive. Why is that a problem for him or her?
He's a president.
Okay.
Have a lot of money.
Right, so I've only got $100 a month, and now instead of spending $5 on clothes, I gotta spend twice as much. I have to spend $10 on clothes. So that's now a $20 expense for those two items. I'm now spending substantially more money. So if I do this for all things, what's gonna happen to all prices in England? They're all gonna go up. So any cheap alternative coming from another country, I can't buy it anymore. I gotta buy all of the more expensive stuff that's made here in Britain. All right, and that's actually gonna harm their economies quite a bit. That's not even considering the fact that now France can't really sell a lot of stuff to them. So France loses money, so they put up tariffs, and now the British stuff that was selling to the French, they can't sell that, so they lose money that way. So they lose money twice. They lose money by having to spend more themselves, and they also lose money because they can't sell to other countries very well because of the tariffs they put on them. All right, so it really harms everybody. Anyways, tariffs and taxation are going to be the core fundamentals here, and the whole goal, again, is to discourage people from buying stuff from other countries or states and buying it all within your own state. But I just showed you that's going to harm everybody. It's to make it more expensive to buy stuff in your state, and also you're going to sell less because other states will buy less of your stuff. So it's all bad for the most part. All right, so that's the fundamentals of mercantilism. We got that? All right, cool. So that's how they do it with tariffs. That's one strategy for achieving wealth. The second one is to literally, I guess you would say, steal from your competitors. And by that I mean states. So if I'm a British ship and I'm sailing along in the Indian Ocean and I see a Portuguese ship sailing back, what's likely to happen under this mercantilist system?
Take
They
your
don't
stuff.
fight for each other.
Yeah, they're gonna be fighting to control, well, trade first of all, but if they see individual ships, they're just gonna take the stuff that's on the ships, right? So this is gonna cause a lot of conflicts on these trade routes. So there's gonna be two things going on here. Number one, you're gonna have piracy, right? And the Caribbean's a big target for that because it's so remote compared to the rest of Europe, and the trade winds just kind of dump you off in the Caribbean Sea. So that makes it easy for pirates to just kind of wait for ships to keep coming through to pirate from. All right. What is it called though when I'm a government and I hire pirates to steal stuff for me? Privateers. Yeah. I don't know if they gave you the example, but the example that I give you is Sir Francis Drake. He was an English pirate who was hired by the English crown, the king, the monarchy, to pirate Spanish ships. So he just basically chilled, I don't have the Americas up here. He basically just chilled off the coast of South America on the western coast, all the way up here up until about San Francisco Bay region. And he just absolutely devastated Spanish shipping. They couldn't catch him, and he got a ton of money for the English crown. So they knighted him, actually. All right. The other way you can steal from your competitors is you literally take their trade routes by force. All right, so the Dutch and the British do this to the Portuguese because what kind of an empire did the Portuguese have set up here initially? Trade posts, right. So all these, not all of them, but a lot of these little trade post empire cities that the Portuguese establish, they can't defend all of them all the time. They can't communicate instantly. So over time, the British and the Dutch are just going to bully the ships in them and take these cities and claim them as their own. So they're going to, of course, how can I say this? Control trade networks. All right, and that's going to be by force too. It's not like, oh, this is ours now. No, they actually fight for them and take them. All right. And the third way mercantilism can make money is a concept known as colonialism. Did you guys cover that? No?
Wait.
Yes, no, maybe so. Colonialism. That is simply this. It is the sending of Europeans, in this case, we're talking about European colonialism, the sending of Europeans across the world to settle and take over the land and resources in that area. So at the time, we don't really have a lot of that going on over here because they can't, because in Africa you got the tropical diseases. In Asia, you've got the large land empires that the Europeans don't have the money to go after yet, being so far away. So they can't really do it there. But where could they establish colonies and take over land and claim the resources as their own and settle there?
The Americas.
Yeah, the Americas, and that's exactly what they do. So we have colonialism, which again, in this case, we're talking Europe. It's going to be the settling and controlling of land and resources abroad. Abroad just means outside of your own country, basically. In this case, it's going to be in the form of a maritime empire. Okay. Do you think that Europeans, after they claim the land, they're going to fight over who owns it?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, right? So you're going to have colonial conflicts and wars as well here. So there's going to be competition to claim and defend these colonies. Because if I own a colony and I hire or use native workers or indentured servants or West African slaves, that money is going to be really, those resources are going to make my country a lot of money, whether I'm Spain or Portugal or whoever. So they're going to fight over these. They'll set up forts, naval bases, they'll have entire wars over these territories, trying to get as many resources as possible for their own state, their own mother country. So that's colonialism. So these are the three ways mercantilism going to make them money. You guys got that? All right. So what encouraged initially, I think I talked about it yesterday in the study hall, what encouraged Spanish and Portuguese initially to go out, risk their lives with almost nothing, and try to conquer and settle these places? What was their incentive? Why would they want to do that?
Encomiendas.
Yeah, they were granted encomiendas for conquering, right? So initially, you've got some incentives to settle, but it's not paid for, at least not much, by the monarchies, because they don't have enough money to fund all these trips and pay for all these troops. So they depend on independent people to do it, right? So the first wave we talk about are those conquistadors. We talked about them yesterday. I won't go over them again. But that's just guys like Pizarro, Cortez. They go conquer an area, and the reward is they're now the feudal lords of that area, essentially. All right, that's a good incentive. A lot of people try, and a lot of people fail. The other way, though, this is the one that the English and the Dutch use a lot of, and the French, but mostly the English and the Dutch. These are called charter companies. And this one, I'm sure you guys had explained to you, but I mean, I don't know how well you understood it. It's an abstract concept. It's a difficult one. So, a charter company is a really good way to fund exploration and settlement. All right, so you're not going to be able to depend on kings and queens to pay for all this, and they can't. So, I need private investors to do this. So, any gentry or any nobility or anyone who has money that's willing to pay for this. So, before I get into the details of what a charter company is, they need to acquire funds. So your two options back then were one, you could have monarchs pay for it, right, like Henry the Navigator, the Prince, or Ferdinand Isabella funding Christopher Columbus, but that's not easy to do. Monarchs only have so much money. What's a way I could get multiple people to sort of contribute or invest into an exploration/settlement expedition? Yeah, joint stock. So how does this joint stock funding work?
You would have a group of people pay a portion for the voyage, and then they split it among everyone.
Yeah, they do, proportionally split it, or they're supposed to anyway. So let's say this ship here represents the cost. Let's say it's like, I don't know, $1 million. I'm making the numbers up, obviously. So if I have $100,000, that's 10% of that, I would contribute that possibly to this, what am I talking about? Voyage, I invest it, so boom, there's my 10%. Right, and then 9 other guys or whatever invest for the rest of it. Yay, the ship goes off, it goes to the New World, and hooray, it comes back with a bunch of tobacco or sugar or gold or whatever. All right, so let's say that crew hauls in like $10 million worth of goods after you pay them. So like you've already paid the crew, and you're left with a profit of $10 million. What do you get? You get $1 million, right? You get the 10% back. So you put in 10%. So whatever the profit is, you get back that 10%. All right, that's a great system. In fact, they even get smarter than this about it. So let's pretend I have $1 million myself, and I'm like, all right, I want to invest. What might be a bad idea, or a dangerous or risky idea about me paying for a voyage all by myself? What's the problem here with this, the threat?
If you get nothing back, then you basically wasted.
Yeah,
money.
a lot of these ships didn't come back. Either they were killed, or they were by natives, or other Europeans, or there was some sort of accident, or they just died of disease. All kinds of reasons these ships don't come back. Like, a lot of them didn't. It's not just like, oh, a few didn't. A lot of them did not. So if I sink all my money into one ship, and I send it off, what happens if it doesn't come back?
You lose money.
Yeah, I basically just shipped off my money, right? So that's gonna be gone. So what could I do maybe to make sure that my odds of making money are much, much, much higher?
Invest in more than one.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of putting all my million into one ship, I might put 100,000 in 10 ships. So is there a good chance that like 4 or 5 or 6 of those ships are gonna come back?
Yeah.
There is, right? There's a much more likely chance that people are gonna come back with profits. And the profits are usually much higher than what I invested. So even if half the ships don't come back, I'm okay, because the returns are so good that I still make money off of the half that do come back. All right, so that's joint stock, and that's how people start investing with it. All right, so there's the funds, and there's my options. I can either joint stock it, or I could accept royal support, what's called patronage. All right, so these charter companies are essentially, when they have the funds, they go and officially get permission. This is the charter, the contract, from the whatever country or state they're from. So whether it's England or the Netherlands, you would go to the government or the king, and you would have, your company would have a charter, which is like a contract, which grants your company the authority to settle in the name of whatever your country is. So we'll just say England in this case. All right, so there's a charter for England. All right, so for like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever the charter says, you actually, as a company, are essentially going to be the government in that area. So like, you have to burden all the costs. Like if you need to pay for soldiers, you need to hire them yourselves. You need to pay for ships, you need to hire them yourselves. The crew, all that stuff, you have to fund. But you get all the benefits for a while. So once you've established that colony and the contract runs out, then the government takes over. Right, the king actually officially becomes part of the empire. You still get to keep your company there and operate there, but you don't own that. And that's what the important thing to know about these charter companies are. They work rather well, relatively well, because they were privately funded, and they would of course manage their own areas. So some were successful and some weren't, but it was a good way to get people out there and going to do it. So here's a couple things that they could do. I don't know if we covered these or not. Did you cover what they could do specifically, like the powers they had?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So they could raise their own military, so whether it's Navy or soldiers, so raise own military force. That was legal for them, by the way. That's what made it kind of weird too, by the way. They would fight over these trade networks with other companies. So I could be British and potentially fight other British ships. That was kind of rare, but certainly they would fight other countries' charter companies. So here's an example. The Netherlands, the Dutch, and the English were pretty friendly. So they pretty much never fought for the most part. They were always allies. But even if my countries are friendly, if I'm with an English charter company, like the British East India Company, and I'm sailing along, and I see a Dutch ship from the Dutch East India Company, what's going to happen?
They're gonna fight.
Yeah, they're going to fight, exactly. They're going to fight over the trade ports, they're going to fight on the open seas, they're going to fight for territory, even though their countries are actually, peaceful or even allies, because these companies are operating kind of on their own because of these charters. So they can raise an army, they can administer laws in the area, right? So they can't make up their own stuff for the most part. They have to use the other countries' laws. They're like the government there, at least temporarily. They can also sell and distribute the land as they want, just like a government can. And they can also negotiate with local rulers. The company that does this the best, here's an example company, is the British East India Company. They actually are so successful, they are going to conquer and colonize all of India, what is now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So like entire civilizations are taken over by companies. So that's how efficient some of them can be at negotiating and using their funds to raise their own armies and encouraging people to come work for them. So over the course of about 100 years, the British East India Company starts in this tiny little sliver, and that they're going to either by force or diplomatically add these local territories in India until one day they're going to chase out the Mughal Empire and they're going to rule this whole area as a company, helped by the British, of course. But yeah, a company is going to essentially take over those three modern-day countries and administer them. All right. So do we understand what a charter company is? What is it?
Okay, company that was given authority by the
State.
state, yeah, by the state, and it was able to, it was able to do the same things that a normal state would do, except for the fact that it could also store allies and all that.
Yeah, exactly. It functions like a miniature government for a set amount of time, and then they hand the territory over to the government, but they can still operate there. And the profitability is quite high. Cool. So that's mercantilism. I think, is there anyone want to talk about mercantilism? Terrorist competition? Yeah. Got it. Cool. So let's do Tokugawa. Cross the Reformation, Russia, and the Qing Dynasty. So, some of these Europeans actually make the first connections ever with Japan. Very, very far away. Oh, I should erase that, and I don't know where it ends. I think that's where it ends. So, some of these initial Spanish and Portuguese sailors, whether they go around the world or around Africa, they're going to eventually connect with China, and last, they're going to connect with Japan. All right? So, what were the three motivations for exploration we talked about, or you talked about anyway?
God, glory, and I forgot the last one.
Gold, yeah. They wanted wealth, they wanted prestige, like these conquistadors wanted to get themselves their own feudal kingdoms, and they also wanted to spread Christianity. So, in the 15 and 1600s, we have a lot of Spanish and Portuguese missionaries. Do you guys remember what a missionary is? What are they? Yeah, that's their mission, is to just spread Christianity or Islam or whatever religion that they believe. So these are Christian missionaries. So they're Catholic, obviously since they're Portuguese and Spanish, and they get into Japan, and they're going to really aggressively try to convert a bunch of Japanese. And they actually get quite a few, especially in South Japan. There's one other European power that gets there, and they don't do anything religious. They're just like, whatever, we just want to trade with you guys. Those are the Dutch. And these guys are the ones that don't get in trouble, and these guys are the ones that get in trouble. So they arrive in Japan and they start their missionary work in the late 1500s and the early 1600s. All right, so they're there. All right, so we know the missionaries there now, and they're converting people, but not the Dutch. The Dutch are pretty much just there economically. All right, so in 1600, we have a brand new, for the first time, unified, centralized Japan. This, as far as I know, hasn't happened, at least hasn't stayed stable, a unified central government in Japan. So, who were the highest part of the feudal hierarchy in Japan? The shoguns. They were the shoguns. Those are the individuals, yes. So, we had one family, one clan, called the Tokugawa clan. They were, of course, led by a shogun. And that shogun, through diplomacy and forming allies as well as conquest, they're going to, for the first time, conquer all regions of Japan and unify them under one centralized government. All right, and that centralized government is going to be known as the Tokugawa shogunate. And the reason why it's called that is there's still an emperor, but the emperor is only, what's the word I'm looking for? Not cosmetic, but figurative, thank you. He's only a figurative leader. He doesn't actually have authority. The real authority is actually with the shogun. If you guys ever watched that Bill Wirtz World History in 10 Minutes or whatever, it's super good, by the way. He does the thing on, he does the history of Japan. If you go watch the history of Japan, he talks about that whole debacle that they have. Anyways, so there is an emperor, but he doesn't actually have power. He's just a figurative head. The actual leader is the shogun at the head of the Tokugawa clan. All right, so he moves the capital from Kyoto. Remember they tried establishing that as the capital with the Taiko reforms a while back. He moves the capital to Edo. which is along the coast of the Pacific, so Edo. Some people actually call this era that the Tokugawa shogunate was in charge, the Edo period. And that's going to last all the way until 1600 to 1868, I believe, when they're overthrown. So, Tokugawa, they're going to be shoguns that rule from Edo. That's the new central government. And things are going to actually do quite well under the Tokugawa. They're going to have more peace because there's not a bunch of little feudal kingdoms fighting each other all the time. So they're under a centralized government. There's more peace and prosperity. They're able to do things like focus more on education, fighting against famine, things like that. So things are looking up. But there's one development that's going to start. It's going to harm them in the long run. So something happens that doesn't happen much under centralized Japan. There's going to be a rebellion. Do we know what the name of that rebellion is?
Shimabara?
Yeah, Shimabara Rebellion. All right, that's in the 1630s. I think it's 1637 actually. 1637, you have the Shimabara Rebellion. Now these are peasants who are opposing the taxes and policies of this shogunate. Now again, once Japan is centralized, obviously feudal Japan fought a bunch just like feudal Europe does. But once the Tokugawa shogunate had unified it, we're going to have very little actual violence and fighting and crime. Like it's all going to drop. All right, so this is one of the few instances of a major opposition to the government. All right, so these peasants are of course going to be motivated by fighting against taxation and tax policies. But there's one other thing that characterizes these people that the shogunate really focuses in on.
They're Catholic.
Yeah, most of them have been converted by Spanish and Portuguese missionaries to Catholicism. So a majority of rebels were Catholic. Now the Tokugawa shogunate crushed this rebellion, but they're going to change their policy and attitude towards foreigners. They're going to blame this event on the fact that these foreign ideas from the Europeans, Christianity, were the root cause of this rebellion, essentially. So they're going to ban Christianity, but even more than that, what else are they going to ban?
Any interaction with foreigners.
Exactly. So if I'm a Japanese person and I leave and come back, I'm subject to punishment or death. And if I'm a foreigner and I show up, even if you don't know, and you're caught, you are subject to punishment and death as well. In fact, it was just death. So starting after the Shimabara Rebellion, I think by 1639 it was finalized, we have an era, 39, known as Sakoku. And that's going to last all the way until 1853, when the United States ends their isolation by force. So for about 200 years, the Japanese are closed off to pretty much everybody except for one group who stuck strictly to trade and didn't really try to interfere with them in their culture.
China?
No, it's like the Dutch, although they do trade a little bit with the Chinese still. But the Dutch are the major trade partners that they're going to allow in it. Like 2 or 3 ports they can come in, as long as they don't do any missionary work. And the Dutch were cool with that. They're just like, whatever, we'll take some money. So, Sakoku is this Japanese isolation era. And the Japanese, unfortunately, chose one of the worst times to isolate themselves from the world, because this is right at the same time, roughly, when the Europeans are going to make all kinds of innovations and discoveries. So Japan, in 2 centuries, is going to fall incredibly far behind the West in Europe, because they're going to have the scientific revolution and develop all kinds of crazy new technologies and ideas, and the Japanese are still going to be sitting on Japan with their samurai swords, essentially. So that years later, when the US shows up and says, hey, we want to trade with you because we want your money, and the Japanese want to say no, they can't, because they don't have any of the gunpowder weapons that they would need to stop the United States. So that's going to be a major event in Japanese and world history, and it's going to lead to World War II, which will, at least in Asia, which we'll talk about later in the year. So, any questions about the Tokugawa shogunate? So note things about them. Unified Japan central government, peace and prosperity, but after the Shimabara Rebellion, which they blamed on Christianity, they're going to shut themselves off from foreigners and foreign ideas, and they chose the wrong time to do it, because the rest of the world is going to be advancing, especially in Europe, quite quickly. All right, we got that? All right, cool. Let's do Russia and the Qing Dynasty, and maybe the Protestant Reformation. Russia, super quick. In fact, I'll kind of have you guys tell it to me if you can. So, what was the empire out of Central Asia that controlled this region in the 1300s? Yeah, the Mongols, the Golden Horde. However, by the 1400s or so, or the 13 or 1400s, the Golden Horde is going to weaken, and these Slavic peoples are going to chase them back out. So, Golden Horde is going to be out, and temporarily, we have the people of that were the Kiev and Rus. So we have Kiev, Novgorod, and Muscovy are the three major areas or territories that emerge or re-emerge. Right, so I got Kiev, I've got Novgorod, and I've got Muscovy. So who is going to, in the 1500s, conquer the rest and incorporate them into a, what is the first Russian state or like a Russian empire? What? Oh, Muscovy, yeah, but what leader? You're right, it's going to be Muscovy that does it, which capital is Moscow. But who's the person that does that?
Ivan the Third.
Yeah, Ivan the Third, who is later known as Ivan the Great. Ivan the Third is Ivan the Great in the 16th century. I don't know the exact years, I think it's the 1520s, but don't quote me. He's going to conquer Novgorod, take almost all of their territory, and eventually take parts of Kiev. That actually falls later, but he does unite what type of people? Not all Slavic people. There's many other Slavs. What type of Slav do they unite? For the most part, almost all of them.
The Rus?
The Rus people, the Russians, yes. So he crowns himself Tsar or Emperor of the Rus. And this is what we have as the first Russian state. And Russia's only going to expand from this point on for the most part. All right, cool. So that was good. And look, he got the name Ivan the Great because he did so well. How about his son?
Terrible.
Ivan the Terrible, yeah. Ivan the Fourth, or the Terrible, not as awesome. All right. So what were these nobles that had a lot of independence and power in this area before it was sort of taken over and centralized by, or at least started to be centralized by the czars?
Boyar.
Yeah, so I had a lot of Russian nobles, known as boyars, who had a lot of independence and political power. However, Ivan IV's goal was to increase his personal power and centralize the Russian state, or at least start it anyway. So, one of the things he did was he stripped these guys of their land and titles, at least in half of the territory that was his. And how are they going to feel about that one? Yeah, so what are they going to do about it? They're just going to sit back and be like, oh, that sucks. No, they're gonna try to muster up some resistance to this. So, unfortunately for them, they're dealing with a paranoid psychopath in Ivan IV. And these boyars who are going to try to resist his land reforms, because they, like I said, they lost a lot of their land when it became his private stuff. So they're going to resist, but unfortunately for them, they're going to be crushed, not only militaristically, but he's actually going to send what's kind of like a secret police force out to apprehend and kind of destroy this entire class, at least in his area. What was the name of that phase, or that sort of secret police force that did that? Yeah, Oprachina, if we're even saying that right. And the, I guess you would say, miniature era or time in which they were terrorizing people was known as the Oprachina Terror. So this is the secret police. And that's how he got his nickname, by the way, because he would confiscate them, take their land, and then torture and kill them, essentially. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Enough to really terrify everybody, especially the people in Novgorod. He would go after them particularly, with particular tenacity. It's the Oprachina Terror. All right, so that's the darker, I can't even say dark history of Russia, because Russia's history is almost entirely dark. But we have more of a bright spot in the late 1600s and early 1700s with a new ruler who's going to expand, make some reforms that are a little dark and sinister at some points, but overall they're going to be beneficial.
Peter the Great.
Yeah, Peter the Great. And he was a fanboy of who?
Louis the
Louis XIV. Yeah, he really liked the way that he did things, and he's going to copy him almost on board. I just want the year for, I think it's 1786, but I don't know, I'll write the wrong one. Or sorry, 1686. what is it exactly? It's
1682.
82, there we go. 1682 to 17, I am 25, thank you. All right, so some reforms he's gonna make. He's gonna try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Centralize, but he's gonna enhance the power of the monarch. He's gonna enhance monarch power, just like Louis did. And he's also gonna try to westernize them. So he's gonna try to copy some of the tactics Western Europeans are using. So what does he try to do with the economy in Russia?
Tries to make a maritime.
Exactly. He tries to form a maritime empire with colonies and trade. It's too late for that, though, because pretty much Europe's claimed all the land that can be claimed at that time before they have technology to go into the rainforests and take over other empires. So where does he try to build this new city to make this, new trade city and capital?
St. Petersburg.
Yeah, so he builds St. Petersburg on a swamp, literally. Lots of people dying constructing that bad boy. St. Petersburg, he attempts to become a maritime empire, or make Russia a maritime empire. All right. And he wants to be, that's for trade. But they can't, because like I said, it's pretty much all claimed, or at least the territory that can be claimed at the time, by either Spain or Portugal, England, Netherlands, or France. So what does Russia have to resort to as far as expansion? Because they can't really do it over the seas. How do they do it?
Expanding into the eastern.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to expand into Asia, into Central and East Asia. Nice. Okay. Did she tell you what they did with what he did with the nobles?
He gave them power in the government.
Yeah, so he kind of went along the lines of Louis. Louis did a better job of it, but he basically forced them all to move around him and used them in the military and government, kind of like Louis did. So I would say he controlled the nobility. Excellent. There was one problem though. It's really expensive to build an entire city. Oh, and his palace too, which was he was trying to copy Versailles. What was the name of his palace?
Windsor.
Yeah, Windsor Palace. All this is very expensive, requires a lot of labor. So if a government's going to buy something like this and pay for it, where's the money coming from?
Peasants.
Yeah, the peasants. They increase what to get it? Taxes. So a lot of these peasants don't like the overcrowding and the overtaxation. So what do these peasants end up doing? Yeah, moving. Okay, cool. So we had the Empire of Russia beginning, and they're going to expand even without Peter, but with Peter they're going to expand even more. So they get into Central Asia, they get into East Asia, and of course these peasants are going to say, well, screw this area with all of its taxes and its overcrowding, and they're going to start settling these Russian peasants on the frontier in Central Asia by the military forts and things like that. Okay, cool. So that's Russia, and that's how that's at least Russia during period 2. All right, China during period 2. We start with which dynasty? Ming, nice. They're the ones that kick out the Mongols in 1368. I'm not sure that's the exact year. 1644. They do rather well. Initially, they continue the maritime trading and the tribute system, and they even send a large naval force and trading force around the Indian Ocean all the way into Africa, led by Zheng He, Admiral Zheng He, yeah. So there's a lot of maritime trade and voyages at the beginning, and Zheng He's expedition is an example one. Comes back with a lot of exotic goods. He gets all the way, as far as I know, to the Swahili coast, and then he goes back. But the Ming's going to focus on something else. What are they worried about happening again?
The Mongols conquering.
Yeah, or just pastoralists in general, even if the Mongols can't organize themselves. They're worried about this northern frontier. So here's the Ming. They're worried about this northern frontier where they've had a lot of troubles with pastoral tribes before, Mongols, Zhongyu, etc. So they focus a lot on bolstering their defenses up here with soldiers and walls and fortresses. And where do they take that money from? I know they raise taxes and they have the silver-only tax, but like, what do they? Instead of using, so they use government money for this instead of what? What do they neglect and go away from?
The Indian Ocean trade.
Yes, exactly. So they basically let their navy rot into nothingness, and they de-emphasize trade and they focus on northern defense, and they neglect maritime trade. All right, how does that work out for them?
Miserable.
Badly, yeah, and they have the whole silver tax debacle, or silver tax policy debacle. Their economy takes a hit. They're not going to be making money off of building defenses. That's just going to protect them, so they don't have income, as much income coming in through trade, and at least they're vulnerable to invaders from where?
Manchuria.
Yeah, modern day Manchuria, which is also the north. So good thing we have those defenses that they just rode around. And these Manchu invaders, the dynasty they began in 1644 is known as what?
Qing.
Qing, yeah. So these are Manchurian or Manchu invaders, different ethnic group. All right, so they take over, and they're actually going to expand the Qing dynasty, the Chinese, by quite a bit. They're going to expand to the south a little bit. They're finally going to conquer this Himalayan empire that's always giving them trouble. Tibet, yeah. They're going to get back into Central Asia, and they, of course, incorporate their own area of Manchuria. And China is going to become as big, the biggest it has ever been. All right, so they're going to add a lot of territory, and that includes Tibet. That's always giving them trouble. And who was one example of a great emperor who lived a long time and helped expand China's borders quite a bit under the Tang? Yeah, Emperor Kangxi. Oops. What else did he do that demonstrated his power and authority?
Portraits.
What kind of portraits? Mini portraits?
Life-size.
Life-size portraits, right. That's like a theme back then. His monarchs tried to show how powerful they were by paying for these ridiculous projects or art pieces. So in the Ottoman Empire, we have those miniature paintings. In China here, we have life-size portraits. In what did like Peter the Great and Louis XIV do? Palaces, right. So they would dump all this money to demonstrate their power. Life-size portraits. Okay. And the Qing are going to do very well up until period 3 in world history. And they're going to suffer at the hands of the Europeans and their new technologies and imperial power. But how badly are these Manchu people outnumbered by the Han Chinese, which again are this ethnic group here? Yeah, about 10 to 1. So they're going to have to be pretty strict to keep control of them. And the Han are the native Chinese there. But there's a couple things they like about the Han civilization in China. It's lasted a long time, probably a lot consistently longer than any other civilization in the world. What's one of the things that they end up keeping?
Neo-Confucianism system.
Yeah. Why do they like Neo-Confucianism so much?
Because of the social harmony.
Yeah, it really had a good model, an East Asian model anyway, for maintaining social harmony. So there's a lot less rebellions. And there's a lot more stability than in most places in the world, which is one of the reasons why China's lasted so long. All right, cool. But of course, Neo-Confucianism is rather oppressive as far as, regarding women anyway. So they like Neo-Confucianism. What else do they keep?
Examination.
Yeah, so that examination system, Confucian examination system. And what is this examination system? What's it for, and why would I do it?
Basically to get into the government.
Uh-huh.
So you would have to study basically your whole life, and you take the test.
Or for many years anyway, yeah.
And then you take the test. If you pass it, you get a spot in the government.
Yep, at least you're eligible to, exactly. So, but why, there's tons of people, I have a government job right now, like technically, like why do we not care about government jobs as much here, but they care about them so much, at least in China at the time?
The hierarchy.
What about it?
The governors were the top spot.
Yeah, the government officials had the most power and wealth for the most part in China at the time. Because remember, they didn't value merchants over there. Europeans value independently wealthy merchant class people, right? In East Asia, especially in China, they don't value them. They see them as people making money off of others. They value people that maintain power and authority and harmony. So that's like the pinnacle of Chinese society, is to get into the government. So that's why people dedicated the majority of their, at least young lives, to do it. All right, so that's the stuff they kept. What are the policies they implement, though, that are kind of oppressive? In fact, one is, it's just straight oppressive. In an attempt to kind of control and prevent their race from being sort of bred out.
They ban intermarriage.
Between whom?
Between Han and Manchu people.
Exactly. Between Han and Manchu. And like I told you earlier, even though it's not illegal as far as I know, in China currently, they still don't condone marriage between the two ethnic groups. It's one of those things like, if it was like 1830 and you're in the South and you were like a white person and a black person that got married, like your families would probably disown you. And that's sort of the situation that some families in China experience. Like I told you about my college professor who had that exact scenario. Her family disowned her because she married a Manchu person. She's Han Chinese. So that sort of racism continues today over there. All right, what else did they do that was oppressive as a means to control and subjugate the Han people?
They have the Q, which is for the male hairstyle.
Yep, where they shave the front of it, and you gotta have the braided ponytail thing in the back. And they were required, punishable by imprisonment and or death, depending on the severity. So they, of course, require Q hairstyle, whoops, for all men. Cool. All right, so I will cover the process of Reformation when we do the Scientific Revolution next week. Adios. All right, so process of Reformation and Scientific Revolution. So, process of Reformation. All right, so why do I have a bunch of old Christian texts like from St. Augustine and some of the scriptures, as long as the other classical knowledge?
Information being brought back from the Holy Land with the Crusades.
Yeah, there we go. So we got coming back from the Crusades. All right, so info from Crusades. Let me talk about this at the Renaissance. It's the same stuff. What other trade network brought some stuff in around the 12 and 1300s?
Recently reinvigorated the Silk Road.
Yep, Silk Road before it gets shut down again. And then, of course, Venice and other traders with the Arab caliphates as well in the Mediterranean. Trade in Mediterranean. All right, cool. So that information comes back. We get skepticism again. We get a lot of old secular thinking. That was the Renaissance stuff. But regarding religion, we're going to have, like I said, some of those classical Christian texts, like St. Augustine, one of the early Christian writers, and the Gospel from the disciples. So you've got Gospel, Scripture, St. Augustine writings are all coming back. All right, but before I talk about how that's impacting things over there, or in Europe, how were things set up in Europe just before and as these are coming in? And what I mean by that is, who's got access to the Scripture or the Bible, and how? Okay, how? Nice. Catholic Church is going to be the ones that control the information, essentially. Info regarding Christianity. And let's not forget that they don't have it in every language. They only have it in, depending on where you are, Greek or Hebrew or Latin, mostly Latin, as far as like their documentation goes. So they've got their own documentation they make. They've got some of the old texts in their original languages. And who's the authority under the Catholic system? Who's their authority regarding like how to go to heaven, how to be a Christian, and all of those things?
The Pope, Cardinal.
Yeah, so the church itself. So would you say it's the documents or the organization? The organization, yeah, okay, cool. So they are considered the authority of spiritual life. That means, I heard the whisper, that means they're the ones that determine what you're supposed to do to go to heaven, and the details as far as how to get there or get out of purgatory and not go to hell, and how you should confess and how often, and all of the festivals and holidays you should realize, and when you should and shouldn't eat fish, all that stuff. They're the ones that are going to determine that. Because again, as many people are going to find out, almost none of that stuff is actually in these documents. All right, it's mostly created by the Catholic Church across centuries, different councils and popes, etc. All right, so they're the authority of spiritual life, and they have some corrupt practices are in place, and they're actually, it's not like they're doing them behind closed doors, like they're doing them out in the open. Like some of these are official policies. So what are 3 examples? Well, there are 3 examples. Give me one and explain it as well. That some of these reformers, like Luther, are going to start complaining about. So just one and explain it.
Indulgences where you buy your way into heaven.
Oh yeah, or out of purgatory quicker. Yeah, there you go. Indulgences. So that's kind of like selling salvation. All right. I don't know second. I think it was you.
Nepotism.
Nepotism, which is.
They give church positions to their family members.
Yeah, instead of making it based on merit or who should earn it based on the time committed, etc., they're giving it off to family members. All right, that's clearly a corrupt practice.
Selling offices.
Yeah, also probably even more corrupt is simony, or at least as corrupt. That's where they're just selling the offices to the highest bidder instead of basing it on their spirituality or history in the church or experience or anything like that. All right, so definitely we're going to have some people complaining about that. Unfortunately for those that complained before the 15th century, it was not easy to get their ideas out. Can we think of an example of somebody that may have protested and then ended up paying the ultimate price for that? Jan Hus from the Czech Republic, or Bohemia, what's now the Czech Republic. Jan Hus tried this in the 1300s, but there was no way to disseminate the information. There's another guy named John Wycliffe in England. He's pretty far away from the Catholic Church as far as the Pope goes. He was able to not be pursued, but Jan Hus got the stake, burned at the stake, as far as I know. I think he was burned at the stake. Regardless, he was killed. All right. So, as a heretic. What's going to change this, though? What's going to allow later critics of the church to distribute their information before the church can silence them and allow their ideas to spread and become popular? Yeah, the printing press is going to really change the dynamic here. All right, cool. So there's a particular monk who has gotten access to some of these original documents. He's reading them, and he realizes some of the inconsistencies. His name's Martin Luther. You guys all know that. Like 30 hands up. So Martin Luther, he's going to write a document and nail it on the door of the Wittenberg Castle and church. And I want to know what the name of this document is and what is it exactly. Oh, half the hands went down. You're looking, but I would accept it.
95 pieces, it's like 95 reasons why.
Yeah, that's kind of like 95 problems he has with the Catholic Church at the time. All right, he probably could come up with more, but he did the 95. So Luther, in 1570, is kind of like the unofficial or even official beginning of the Protestant Reformation. He's going to have his 95 Theses. Okay, and so what are some of his criticisms then of Martin Luther? He's a monk, again, a German monk. I think he was from Saxony, don't quote me, but German monk, and he's going to, somebody fell, I guess, in the other room. He's going to be a German monk, and he's going to protest the Catholic Church. What I want to know is, what are some of the problems he had with this Catholic Church?
Follow scriptures.
How so?
What's it called? It was more like an organization that the Pope would make everything.
Yes, so he was upset that so many of the original writings were being either ignored or not written over, but being added to. And he didn't feel like they were in line with the fundamental values that are being presented in the early scriptures, which is more about like forgiveness and mercy and missionary work, etc. The church had really turned away from that in the Middle Ages, and he pointed out some of the most, I guess, poignant examples where they're really diverging from fundamental Christian theology or belief. All right, cool. So he writes this, and he's going to go to debate them, the Catholic Church, where they eventually plan to kill him, but his buddy Frederick the Elector tips him off, and they get out of there. What was this meeting? Where was it at?
The Diet of Worms.
Yeah, Diet of Worms, absolutely. So he has a debate. He kind of stumps him on a few things, and then he gets out of there after the advice from his friend Frederick the Elector, and they're going to send him off and protect him. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is, we'll talk more about this when we get to AP Euro, but the Catholic Church is going to have a separate meeting by themselves. That's called the Council of Trent. You don't have to write that down, but I just want to set the context a little bit. So the Catholics don't just ignore this. It's like, oh, we got away. I guess that's it. They basically said, well, his ideas are spread now, so we should at least talk about them and see if he's right. So they had this meeting. It was, and I'm not joking, it was a 20-year meeting. It wasn't like one single sitting, obviously, but they talked about this stuff off and on, in the summer and spring when they'd meet. for almost 20 years, this Council of Trent. And, well, they really talked about genuinely, is this guy right? Are some of these things incorrect? Are we, diverging from traditional Christianity? Are we in the wrong? And after 20 years of debate and discussion, they decided that no, they were not wrong. They were right across the board. I'm not joking. That's actually what happened. They rejected all Protestant claims, and they are going to. Their resolve is to oppose and eliminate Protestants as heretics. All right. So this kind of sets off this era of religious war that we're talking about, starting in like the mid 16th century. We'll get more into that when we get to AP Euro. But one of the examples of a large-scale religious war, at least one that started out that way, was well, it sounds like you guys know. All the hands up.
The 30 years.
Yeah, 30 Years War. Okay, well, I'm actually getting a little ahead there. I just want to tell you that side story that helps kind of make sense about the Catholic Church's position regarding Protestants. So they actually talked about it for a while, and then they're like, nope, we're right. So Luther's main problem, well, he had many problems with the Catholic Church, but one of the main ones was he felt that the Catholics had made a bunch of stuff up. That's what he believed, and his followers also believed that. And there was a lot of them. His followers were predominantly in northern and western Germany. He had a lot also in the Scandinavian region when it got there. The Netherlands also liked Protestant ideology, not from Luther, from a guy named Calvin, but very close. Some people in France also, and the English and Scottish later are all going to really like at least the idea of Protestantism. They're at least going to reject the Catholic Church. So again, the Catholic Church, they believe that the people that, or the entity that determines how you get to heaven is, again, remind me, what do they believe is the one that does that? The church themselves, right? They think the Catholic Church, through the Pope and the cardinals, they can make changes to Christian theology, all right? Kind of like a caliph can, like we talked about with the Muslim caliphates. So his problem is the church believes that the authority is, of course, going to be them. Catholics, strictly Catholics. Again, they believe that the authority is the church itself. They can make and change things at will. They believe that the Pope is like the messenger or Jesus incarnate on I don't remember exactly their particular view on it, but he is somehow either linked to communicate or know or be the representative of God on earth. Something along those lines. I'm not Catholic, so I'm not exactly sure, but he has some sort of divine connection or representation. All right, so they can make those changes. Who does Luther, though, the original Protestant, believe is, or what, is the authority regarding how they should be or act as Christians?
Scripture.
Yeah, he believes that it's Scripture alone as authority. Meaning, in fact, actually, somebody tell me what the hell that means. What the heck that means.
Basically, you only need faith in your interpretation of the scriptures in order to...
Yeah, exactly. So if I want to know what to do, I'm supposed to read the Bible and the scriptures, St. Augustine, etc., and I'm supposed to gather my own meaning from that. And the only thing I really need to go to heaven is faith in Jesus or the Trinity or however he phrases it. But it's really just faith. You don't need to do a bunch of like works like not eat fish on this day and go to this festival and have this holiday and pray this many times and confess to this priest. He says none of that's required. You just got to have faith and try to be a Christian and base your life on how you think the scripture is laid out. All right. So I had a question yesterday about like, what is Lutheranism then? Because this is Protestantism. All right. So Protestantism rejects the Catholic Church's authority, and they believe, I should actually be Protestants. They think that Scripture is authority. So what we're going to find out happens immediately is this is not going to be a unified group. All right. So just tell me, what do you think might happen if you give millions of people Scripture and you say, read it yourself and see what it means? Are they all going to interpret it the same? No. So immediately, we're going to have this Protestant movement fragments very quickly. So you've got a bunch of followers that believe what Luther believes, but you also have people that believe other things. You have Calvinists who follow John Calvin's views. You have Zwinglians who believe what Ulrich Zwingli believes. And there's all kinds of people that come up with new ideas. And some of them are going to be persecuted. Like, I know one of the radical, controversial views back then was you shouldn't baptize children. You should wait till they're adults and they can choose it. And people did not like that idea back then. They were called Anabaptists, and they were heavily persecuted across Europe. But regardless, what I want you to know is if you think that you're supposed to interpret the Bible to get your meaning, people are going to have lots of different interpretations of that exact same text. So very quickly, we don't have one single Protestant movement, we have a bunch of different denominations. And if you know anything about Protestantism, if you look at the list of denominations, it's like practically the length of the Bible, just the list of the names of them. Like Baptists and Methodists and, of course I'm running out of names here already, Quakers and Lutherans and evangelicals and all, it just goes, it's a huge list. So that's what's going to happen with the Protestant, it's going to fragment. But they do have to unify, because again, Spain and other Catholic states are coming after them pretty quickly. After the Council of Trent, they decide we've got to reunify Europe and get rid of these heretics. So that's going to lead to all of these religious wars that we'll talk a lot more about in AP Euro. But you do know one of them, 30 Years' War is an example of them. What else do I want to say about this? Oh, what it does with language. So how does this whole printing press thing help develop language?
Because Luther printed the Bible, the scriptures in a certain type of German, so it created vernacular.
There we go. Okay, cool. So he kind of standardizes German, much like Shakespeare helps to do in English and Cervantes helps to do in Spanish. Luther is going to help, he's just going to really, develop a common way of speaking in German grammatically. He's going to develop vernacular German. And how does he do that? It involves the printing press, obviously, but what's he going to, I already kind of said it. How do people read the Bible before? Or any documentation?
They couldn't.
They pretty much couldn't. It was limited to the clergy. Like I said, in some cases, they literally had one Bible or set of documents chained to the church itself, so you couldn't take it. It was often in a language like Latin or Greek or Hebrew, so you couldn't read it anyway. But Luther says, screw that, and he goes through, I don't even know how long it took him, and he translated the entirety of the Bible and the scriptures from its various source languages into German, which takes a long time, and then uses the printing press to mass distribute that. So that does two things. Number one, again, it gives you kind of a standard form of German that everyone begins to recognize and use. But also, now everybody knows his ideas. So this Protestantism thing spreads like wildfire throughout Europe. So yes, it helped develop vernacular German when he wrote the Bible, translated it into the German language, and then spread it out. And of course, everybody else can follow suit too. English does it, then French does it, and then now it's in, I don't even know how many languages, probably, how many languages are there? I think there's several thousand. So I'm sure it's up there, whatever it actually is. All right, that's pretty much what we need to know about the Protestant Reformation in this class. So it's going to cause a major split in Europe. It's going to be driven largely by this printing press and the efforts of Luther and the translations that he does. It's going to develop German, and it's going to start a lot of religious conflicts that are going to devastate Europe for a long time. All right, all the way to 1648 when France decides, let's not do about religion anymore. Let's just focus on expanding our state. All right. Any questions about that? All right, this is why it's connected to the scientific revolution. You're like, why is this connected to the scientific revolution? This is why. All right. Catholics are very, very, very controlling. At least they were, they're not anymore. In the Middle Ages, they were very controlling when it came to information. So if you ever said anything that went against what they said was official, you were considered a heretic, and you could be burned at the stake or killed for it. And you're like, okay, yeah. If you're like saying stuff about Satan or whatever, yeah, okay. They're not saying stuff about Satan though, or saying don't be Christian. They're just saying things like, the earth might be round, or we might not be the center of the universe. We might be orbiting around the sun, actually. That kind of stuff could potentially get you killed. Why would they want to kill you? That sounds a little ridiculous. Just pointing out that we might revolve around the sun. Why would that be wrong? What belief?
What the church is trying to force on.
Yeah, exactly. It's breaking away from what the church thinks as the official doctrine laid out by them and God, right? So it's like you're disagreeing with God to them, all right? And to them, that's punishable, and maybe not necessarily by death, but certainly punishable, a punishable offense. So that's going to be very limiting throughout the Middle Ages. And this is one of the reasons, along with guilds that controlled wages and techniques and things like that, the guilds and the Catholic Church and instability are going to be three major factors that basically keep Europe on a flat line as far as development goes for like almost 1,000 years, probably 1,000 years. However, what's going to break them from this partially is, first of all, the influx of this information, right? The return of skepticism and secular thought and Greek science and all that. But not just that. This Protestant Reformation also contributes heavily. Why might the Protestant Reformation heavily contribute? Now think about this. I haven't told you this yet. If they're controlling information, why would this Protestant Reformation help spur a scientific revolution? Because it actually comes after. I mean, they actually overlap a little bit, but it's more in the after portions that it does.
The Protestants were able to use some control from the Catholics.
Okay.
It helped the scientific revolution because the Catholic Church was enforcing just as they were the Protestants before.
Okay, so like what did the Protestants do different? So okay, Catholics are out in their regions, but why does that necessarily mean all of a sudden they start inventing things?
The Protestants allowed you to think for yourself and your own.
Yeah, they weren't as controlling regarding the information. Now, I'm not saying that no Catholics thought of anything. Like Copernicus thought of his stuff before the Protestant Reformation. Galileo was Catholic too, although he was punished for his ideas. He was put under house arrest, and he literally went into depression, almost suicidal depression. But a lot of the later discoveries and innovations are going to come out of the Protestant areas. And it's not because Protestants are superior or better or whatever, but one thing they do in the states they have control of is they don't care as much about you refuting the Bible. So if you want to say, hey, the Bible might be wrong about this thing, or the church might be wrong about this thing, they're not going to be like, heretic, and then try to stomp you out. They're going to hear you out. And if you're right, they're more likely to go along with it. So what Protestantism does in these regions is it's going to allow new ideas that contradict some of the old Catholic ideas. It's not going to just stomp them out. It's going to let them develop and continue. All right, so a combination between these ideas returning from the Middle East, North Africa, along with more relaxed policies towards new information, are going to allow a lot of these scientific revolution thinkers to continue developing new ideas, all right, without having to worry about being punished by the church or put under house arrest or burned at the stake for being a heretic. Because did I tell you what the Illuminati was?
No.
I never told you what the Illuminati was?
So random.
No, it's not random. It's totally linked to this. So, all right, you high schoolers in Illuminati, man. So like, and celebrities too, because they're so smart. Everyone's all caught up in the Illuminati and their mystique and what are they? And they control things. Like, no, you're going to be sadly disappointed when you find out what the Illuminati are. The Illuminati are a bunch of people. They're basically nerds that liked math and science, but couldn't talk about it because somebody would punish them. Who would go after them to punish them for talking about scientific ideas? The Catholic Church. So they'd have to meet in secret to talk about things that you might consider, well, maybe you guys don't consider it boring, but they would literally meet to talk about ideas about the universe and mathematics and science. That was it. It was a secret science club. You're welcome. I'm happy to destroy your dreams of what the Illuminati is.
So why are celebrities in there?
Because they have a lot of cryptic symbol, but most of it's going to be based on symmetry. I mean, you guys have seen their symbols before. It's like the eyes and like the ruler, and then the other shape that I can't remember the name of. No, it's not the triangle. It's something else.
Circle.
The Freemason one.
Oh, the Freemason thing.
Yeah, the Freemason one. Yeah, but the point is they make all these plays at symmetry and angles and things like that. They're trying to be clever. They work clever. But it's not like they have like billions of dollars and they control the political leaders of the world and all this crap. That's just not true. It's originally a bunch of nerds that would meet to talk about science and math in secret. It was a secret science club. That's what it was. Secret science club. All right, cool. Obviously, it's changed a bit, but that's what it is, really. All right. Now it more so means people that go against mainstream thought, but regardless, that was its origins, and that's who the Illuminati are and were. Okay, what was I saying? Oh, scientific revolution. So, here in the 17th century, there are some ideas that precede this. Copernicus preceded this, and Galileo preceded this, but it really takes off in the 17th century as far as innovation goes. We'll just say 15. Whatever. The 17th century. even the 18th. It's kind of hard to put a date on this because the people that have these ideas are really spread out. But to give you kind of an idea, there's a little overlap with the Renaissance and with the Protestant Reformation, and it goes a little further than both of them. All right, but it's going to start with Copernicus, and he's the first one to really question, at least have a good argument for, why we might not be the center of the universe. Right, so it used to be a geocentric model, meaning we all believed, the Catholic Church believed, and enforced the idea that we're the center of the universe because they believe the Bible said so, or whatever. And anyone who said otherwise could be deemed a heretic. So this guy said otherwise, but he didn't just say it; he had some evidence for it. Right? He observed the stars, he tracked their movement, and he noticed that, well, they would act a certain way. If they were orbiting us, there would be a specific pattern you could notice. All right, but he noticed that pattern did not line up with what he actually observed, did not line up with what their pattern should be. Like if they are circling us, they should be trackable in a certain pattern. But he noticed that they were not. All right, and so using mathematics, I don't understand, and observation, he determined that it looks like, based on the patterns of the stars in the sky and the sun, that we are the ones that are actually orbiting the sun. So he's going to be the one to develop, and again, his argument was excellent. He's going to be the one that develops the heliocentric model. And again, the important thing is he didn't just base it on, I think this is what it is. I just feel it, like it's none of that garbage, none of that intuition, judgment garbage. It's, no, he based it on observation, mathematics, and logic, which is the fundamental principles of the scientific revolution. So you're basing knowledge not on how you feel or what old person or dead person said it. You're basing it on, can we prove it? Can we observe it? Can we test it? Can we use mathematics to show that it's true? All right, so using experimentation, observation, math, or just general logic, that's going to be considered the source of knowledge. So again, I don't care if Aristotle said it or Socrates or Ptolemy or your grandpa said it, doesn't matter. If you can't prove it, doesn't mean it's true. All right, and proving it means I should be able to observe it, experience it, test it, prove it with mathematics or logic. All right, and they're going to largely start that. Okay, did I hit the record on that?
No.
Oh, thank God. Alrighty, so heliocentric model. Who's going to come along later, though, and take a telescope and refine it to the point that it can see so well into the sky that he's able to confirm that even though he's a Catholic and he doesn't want to be right, that he is right, and that Copernicus is also right. Galileo, yeah. Among the many things he does, he refines the telescope, and he's not necessarily trying to prove Copernicus right, but he's just curious. He's like, is this guy right? Like, is that actually how it works? So he refines the telescope, observes the stars up close. He even has some of his assistants go blind looking at the sun. And yep, I think their vision came back, but I do know that they definitely, at the very least, temporarily went blind. And they also saw, too, something that they didn't think was possible. They thought that all stars and the sun, etc., were perfect, like they were the heavens, and they were perfectly symmetrical and blemish-free, but they actually found spots on the sun, dark spots, which indicated imperfection. So that's another thing the Catholic Church didn't like. You're like, what does that even mean? But he's going to find out that, yes, he's going to confirm Copernicus. He's going to find some other things out. He's going to also find that not all celestial bodies, meaning like anything you can see in space or the sky that's not in the atmosphere, all celestial bodies are not perfect. Not all celestial bodies are perfect. So he finds misshapen moons, or at least people after find misshapen moons and rocks and sunspots and all kinds of stuff. New planets they didn't know existed because they can see further now. So a lot of discoveries are going to be surfaced, or are going to appear because of his observation. All right, so that's Galileo. There's actually one other thing he does too. He disproves Aristotle, who asserted that heavier things fall faster than lighter things. It's not even inertia, actually. It's just gravity. So a bad test would be if I took a marker and a paper, and I'm like, look, this marker's heavier than the paper, and look, I'll even show you guys, oh my gosh. Which one's hit the ground first? The marker does, all right? So, therefore, we can assert that heavier objects fall faster. No, it doesn't though. So there's a couple factors here. So if I use a light enough object, somebody already said it, air resistance is actually going to slow it down. So it makes it seem like it's falling slower. But if you took out the air, which they can't do back then, eventually they can make vacuum tubes and they can see, like you can, if you guys ever did like the little kid science experiment where you put the feather and the penny in the tube and you suck the air out of it, and you go like this, they fall at exactly the same speed. Those are going to prove it, but he does it before that too. He takes a heavy rock and a tiny rock. So that should work then. If that's true, that lighter objects fall slower, then a small light rock should fall slower than a large heavy rock. So he goes to the top of the Tower of Pisa, goes to the edge, has a bunch of people observe, takes them off the tower, drops them, boom. Guess which one hits the ground first? They hit at the same time. There's no difference. So once you can eliminate the air resistance based on the density of the object, they show that there's no actual difference in the dropping speed. So he immediately is going to start disproving things like that as well. So he disproves Aristotle's theory of gravity. All right. And that's just a few of the things that get started here with this scientific revolution. Were there any other examples in the notes? Descartes? Descartes. Was there anything besides Descartes? Was there Newton?
Yeah.
Newton, okay. So, well, we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to do these ones kind of quickly. Descartes and Newton. Newton's a badass, by the way. Although, he's a weirdo. So he was one of the smartest people ever to walk the face of the earth. He did some of the hardest stuff ever. It's really hard to create ideas that no one's ever thought of before that are actually viable and make the world better. He did it with several things. He did it with light. He invented calculus to think about things more thoroughly and differently, so that you could actually figure out a lot of the things about gravity. Like he's the one that like calculated gravity. And they still use his formulas, hundreds of years later because he was so spot on with them. He is going to be the one that invents several things, and he's making a lot of discoveries about light. He's going to find the formulas for gravity. He invents calculus. Some of you are like, damn it. But calculus, you wouldn't have a lot of the technology we have without calculus. Calculus. He also, the apple with the gravity. He's going to figure out several universal laws, and these are the things that we still use today in space at NASA and SpaceX and all these guys. They use his numbers and his formulas to calculate these things. He's going to figure out universal laws, meaning that there are certain things that you can figure out based on your time and location. Einstein's going to blow this up later. We'll talk about that later in class. But at the time, on Earth, they figured out a lot of truisms about how you can figure out how fast something's going to fall or accelerate and movement and all these things. So he's going to develop several universal laws that we still use to determine how to send satellites into orbit, rocket ship, and missiles and cars and all kinds of stuff. And that's going to be largely because of this guy. All right, and then Descartes, really quickly, he's kind of based on logic here. He's going to be one who sort of masters or at least codifies deductive reasoning. So he's one that is going to be able to develop a system of thought that is able to prove things based on simple logic. So how do you know something is true? You kind of like reverse engineer it. So what he would do was, he actually reverse engineered all the way to the only thing you can actually know for sure. So here's an example. He wanted to think about the most fundamental thing that he knows as true. All right, so he started doing this one day, and he kept finding reasons to doubt everything. He's like, how do I know that table's there? I can feel it, I can see it, I can hear it if something lands on it, I can taste it or touch it, I can probably smell it too, but what's the problem with all those things? Okay. How do I know that I'm not hallucinating? How do I know that I'm not dreaming? Do I? Are you dreaming right now? How do you know you're not dreaming? What if I'm standing here in an empty classroom in a shut down school and I'm talking to nobody, but in my mind you're all here, right? How would I know you guys are like, oh no, do I exist? You do.
Are you sure?
I do, and he actually figured out. This is the one thing he figured out. He was very troubled by this because he realized that everything can be basically hallucinated, or your senses can be deceived. So you can see things that aren't there, hear things that aren't there, taste that. All those can be fooled, right? You don't know if you're dreaming. You could be hallucinating from something else. Maybe when you're in your garden back then, you accidentally grab some of those mushrooms, and then now you're seeing things that aren't there for sure. So his assertion was, I don't know if anything's real. Like, I don't know if you're real. You could be a figment of my imagination. I have no idea. There's only one thing I can action. In fact, I don't even know if this is my body. Like, what if I'm, like I said, dreaming or hallucinating, or like my mind's hooked up to a computer somewhere and I'm in a totally different body, and this is the projection that's given to my brain from this computer program. Like, there's all kinds of like things that could possibly be true. Like, that's the whole Matrix thing. But there's one thing that he found out, he deduced, that he knows for sure. Now, I don't know this about any of you, and he doesn't know this about any of you, but he knows this about himself. He knows he does exist. He doesn't know if he exists here. He doesn't know if this is his body, but he's independently thinking. He has a consciousness. All right, so whether or not these are our bodies, or that was his body, or this is actual reality, or whatever, I'm an independent thinker, and I can have thoughts. So that means that somebody else isn't controlling that. Right? My thoughts can only really come from me. So the fact that I'm independent and I'm conscious of my existence and I'm thinking about it and I have thoughts, that at very least means that somewhere, probably here, but somewhere I exist. All right? And that's what deduction is. So it's like going back as far as you can about what you know is absolutely true. All right? And he went back as far as existence. And that was the only thing he said he could actually know for sure, was that he existed because he could think. He had independent creative thoughts. All right, that's deductive reasoning. Anyways, so have fun with that Pandora's box of thought, questioning it. This is reality or not, and all that. If your parents are your parents and all that. So we'll cut it at that, huh? Take a quick break. All righty. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the Muslim gunpowder empires, or you did. I wasn't here. The Muslim gunpowder empires, as well as centralization and resistance to that centralization from governments and indigenous people. So, do that real quick. So what were my 3 gunpowder empires?
Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman.
Safavid.
Another one?
Mughal.
Mughal, yeah, that's correct. All right, which one was in India? Mughal. All right. Nice. Which one was in the, like the last Persian dynasty? Safavid, yeah. And then we have Ottoman Empire over here. All right. Okay. So let's do Ottoman first. All right, Ottoman's been around for a while. They used to be an emirate in what was the Seljuk Empire after the Mongols came in, and they're the ones that conquered the rest of the Turks and sort of started the Ottoman Empire. I think it goes back as far as 1199, but we'll start them from when they. Yeah, we'll just say that's fine. We'll just say 1199, even though they weren't large yet. All the way till 1922. So this is a very long duration. An empire lasted a long time. So Ottoman Empire. All right, so they're Turks. They are what religion specifically? Sunni Muslim. Yeah, that's important because they're going to be at odds, conflicting with a neighboring Shia empire. Nice. Okay, ruled by a not a caliph. Sultan. Nice. I'm not sure if they consider themselves caliphs, but I believe they're sultans. Okay, cool. Ruled by a sultan. There are quite a few great Ottoman sultans, but what was the one that expanded them the most and got them furthest into Europe before getting stopped at Vienna?
Suleiman
Suleiman the Magnificent. Yeah, he's the guy with the onion hat, if you've ever seen the picture. So he was around in the 16th century. And there was 2 points where the Ottoman Empire was like at their largest. I think 1683 was technically the largest, but both times they were stopped by a Christian coalition in Vienna in 1529 and 1683. So they're going to be stopped there, but they're going to seize quite a bit of territory, and they are going to be thwarted by the Catholic forces at Vienna twice, and they also are thwarted on the oceans in the Mediterranean near Greece too. Where's that from? Lepanto, yeah. So stopped, as far as Europe goes anyway, stopped at Vienna ×2, and then Lepanto as far as the by sea goes. That's by land. All right, cool. So, but they're going to be a major threat to Europe for a long time, but they're not just fighting Europeans, they're also fighting on the Eastern Front. Who are they fighting on the Eastern Front?
Safavid?
The Safavid, right. And why are they fighting the Safavid, who are also Muslim?
So they're
Yeah, versus the Shia Safavid Empire. And what do we call that series of conflicts that goes on and off for 200 years and depletes both empires substantially of people and resources? Yeah, exactly. And that's going to be, like I said, roughly 2 centuries long, on and off series of conflicts. Some back and forth. I think the Ottomans usually got the better end of it, but I know there's a few times that the Safavid definitely had some victories and pushed in and took some of their territory too. So the Ottoman Safavid conflicts. And those are going on between the 1500s and the 1700s. Again, and the real struggle is the fact that they are different versions of Islam, and of course they're still fighting for territory, for political and economic power. All right, cool. So that's basically how they expanded and came to be one of their greatest rulers. What about in the Ottoman Empire, though? How do they treat Christians? Don't just give me a descriptor like good or bad. Like, tell me exactly what they're doing. Well, actually, before you even answer that, what are they doing that other Muslim states used to do, as far as like the old caliphates and things like that?
The jizya tax and
Yep.
the dhimmi status?
Yep, so they still had that jizya tax and dhimmi status, which again is that second-class status, and tax for being a non-Muslim Christian or a Jew, right? So that is going to be maintained from the previous Muslim states, the caliphates. What's the different one, though? This is the one that gets them their most... They obviously are imperial. That means they conquer and destroy other peoples and nations and incorporate them. But this is probably one of their most obvious human rights violations. One that you might paint them as the bad guy pretty clearly in this one. So what are they doing to Christians specifically in this Balkan region, which is their most troublesome region? These are the people that are the least happy to be controlled.
Blood tax.
Yep, it's called the blood tax, right? The Devshirme or Devshirm. Also known as the blood tax. So somebody tell me what that is. It's terrible, terrible practice that gets a lot of negative, gets a lot of criticism, and rightfully so.
It's when they take the least Christian kids at years.
Yeah, it's almost like a human tax. When they, before the age of 8, they come into these Christian areas and they take their sons. And what do they do with their sons? Some, not all of them. Some are castrated, yeah. So the harem guards, which is again like the female government official and royal family, wives and children, they're going to be in the harem and protected by castrated guards, yeah. Not all of them are castrated though, but yes, that does happen to some.
When they put them into the army.
Yeah, what is that elite group of fighters called though?
Janissaries.
Janissaries, right. So they're going to take 8-year-old Christian boys. Do they leave them Christian?
No.
No, they convert them to Islam by force. And they are going to make an elite military unit known as the Janissaries. All right, and these Janissaries, what's the purpose of these? Why would I be? What is the purpose? Obviously, want an elite military unit, but like, why are they forming this out of the blue? Because they already were doing well militaristically. What's the purpose of this, other than to keep the Christians from, or to try to keep Christians from rising up against them?
To have a loyal army and all that.
Why?
To fight the Safavid.
They're already willing to fight the Safavid. It's actually not so much to fight external powers as internal foes. Why? What's the point of it? I know I wasn't here to explain this to you, but I want to see if you know.
Defeat rebelling nobles and
There we go. So the Sultan is going to be, of course, challenged by wealthy Timurs or other nobles, whether they're Christian or Muslim. Could be Turkic or they could be Christian. Regardless, the Sultan wants a force that's loyal just to him, so that if these Timurs or nobles or Christians try to rebel, they're not, hopefully, going to help them out. They're going to be trained to be loyal just to the Sultan to maintain his power, and they're going to be the best, most well-equipped units too. So their purpose was to protect Sultan versus internal, not so much external, internal struggles. I mean, it's not like they're not going to use them against foreign powers, but they're more so there to keep people in the empire straight. All right, cool. We understand the blood tax and its purpose?
Yeah.
Nice. Next, since we already mentioned them anyway, Safavid Empire. This one's the 1500s and 1600s. I don't remember the exact year. I had 1506 to 1736. All right, this is the last. Let me get a square actually. This is the last unified, independent Persian Empire. All right, and we already mentioned they are Shia Islam, right? So Shia, and this is going to form the modern day identity of which country?
Iran.
Yeah, Iran. Nice. And it's not a sultan that rules them. Who's going to rule this dynasty? The Shah, right. And that's not going to fall until 1979 during the Iranian or Islamic Revolution because the Shah was financially supported by the United States and they did not like that. So they kicked him out and started a Sharia law theocracy. All right, so Shah was the monarch. And they're going to struggle here in this Central Asia, Persia region, and they're going to be embroiled and caught up in this exact same conflict, obviously, because they're the other side of it, during this, sorry, not the Safavid Empire, I meant to highlight this, the Ottoman Safavid conflicts, there we go. And what's the impact of these conflicts on both empires? Because again, we don't just want to know like what it is, we want to know like its historical impact.
Depletes both of their resources.
Yep,
massively.
and leaves them vulnerable to what or who? Ah, you don't know that one, do you? Who does it leave it vulnerable to? They become imperialized by Western forces, and honestly, so do these guys as well. It just takes a little longer. All right, so you eventually have the British and Russians coming in and carving up this, and you have many different European powers. The French, the British, the Italians, the Russians, the Austrians, all carving up the Ottoman Empire as the centuries go on. So does anybody know, by the way, this is ahead. Does anybody know the event or series of events that propels Europe far ahead of the rest of the world technologically and allows them to sort of take over the world, at least for a period of time?
Industrialization.
Yeah, industrialization, right. So first commercialization and then industrialization. Then they start rolling out with a bunch of highly advanced technology cheaply so that all of them have it and they have a massive advantage over these other empires. So that's going to weaken them, obviously, and that's going to make it much easier for European powers against the Safavid Empire, the British and Russians, and against the Ottoman Empire, pretty much everybody, except for maybe Germany, because they're a little late to the game, carving them up. So that's how those two are going to rise and fall. And lastly, with the Mughals. All right, they're the 1500s to the 1800s as well. I don't know the exact years. Let me write it down. 1526 to 1857. All right. This is going to be the last independent Indian empire, but they're not going to be Hindu. They are what?
Turco-Mongol.
Okay, that's true. We're talking about ethnicity. They're Turco-Mongol. But what religion?
Islam.
Islam, right. They're an Islamic empire, a Muslim state. But what was the old empire that was there that was also Muslim that struggled to, I guess, coexist with the Hindu population?
The Delhi Sultanate.
Yeah, the Delhi Sultanate. So what did the Mughals do that's so much better? Because they are a lot more cohesive. I realize that the duration of the empire is about the same, but they are marked by far less conflict. Yeah, they're much more tolerant of the majority Hindu population. All right. In fact, also, they have a great system for making sure those local Indian princes and officials don't try to kick them out. How do they keep them happy? In fact, how do they actually make their lives more powerful and enjoyable? What is the system they set up along with the central government to keep these local rulers happy and loyal?
Zamindar.
Yeah, is that how you say it?
Zamindar.
Yeah, I always call them Zamindar, but Zamindar, I'm just gonna keep saying Zamindar. So Zamindars are local officials or princes, most of them Hindu, non-Muslim, but they were still loyal to the Mughal central government, even though they were Muslim and they were Turkic, Mongolic. They're going to be loyal. Why would they still be loyal to these guys? What are they doing? How are they benefiting? This was explained to you by the sub. or Juliet actually.
They were still allowed some local authority.
Okay, that's true, but that's not gaining anything. That's just keeping what you have. How do they gain?
Government positions.
Okay, what's their role?
Uh,
You guys have to know this. This is like super important. It's one of the major objectives of the AP World Curriculum.
Tax collection.
Yeah, okay, so they're the tax collectors essentially for the central government. So are these guys mostly Muslim Turco-Mongols?
no.
No, what are they mostly? Hindu, like local rulers, right. So they're going to be tax collectors for the Mongols. And they do get to keep their local authority. All right, so they're rewarded for this with property and money of their own. So did their situation get better or worse?
Better.
It got better, right? So they're more or less likely to cooperate with the central government.
More.
Right, yeah, more. I only saw a couple of you say more, but like think about it. You get to keep your religion, you keep your local authority, and you actually have more power and wealth. Does that sound like a good recipe for keeping them happy?
Yep.
It does, right? Delhi Sultanate was the opposite. They lost power, they lost their religion, and they had to fight for it essentially, so that made it a lot less cooperative. Okay, and that's going to define largely this Mughal Empire. That's going to lead to a lot more stability. And when things are more stable, what tends to happen inside of these states?
Trade blooms.
Yes, the economy's boom. Why would the economy get better? Just because my government is stable.
You don't have to worry about like dying.
Yeah, you're not so worried about being invaded or dying or defending your territory because there's laws and rules and people enforce it. You can focus more on your individual and family life and your career or whatever. Because I mean, like, that's how our lives are now. You don't wake up thinking, man, I hope the person next to me doesn't just kill me, take my stuff, and burn my house down. Like, yeah, it's a possibility, but it's really rare because we have a series of laws and police force that would punish them for that. So stability is going to also increase economic growth. Now, it's not quite the Indian golden age like it was under the Gupta, which actually we didn't really talk about because they hacked it off of AP World, but it's still going to be a good era for Indian culture. However, there's two main groups that are going to pick away and chisel away at this empire until it's gone completely and owned by a company, actually. What are these two groups? You probably know one of them at least.
British East India.
Yeah, the British East India Company, a charter company, is going to, through warfare and diplomacy, slowly take all the territory away from the Mughals and later Maratha Confederacy. That's the second one, by the way. And they're going to control what is now Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India as a company. A charter company is going to control all of that, which is pretty crazy, actually. So, chiseled away. Not spelled chisel, by the way. I'm going to make it up. That looks like chiseled. Away by British East India Company and a group of Hindu states in the west known as the Maratha Confederacy. Marathas Confederacy. I first learned about those in Age of Empires. I had no idea who they were, but I learned about them when I was 19 when I played video games. So, and then I read about them here. I was like, oh, I know them from the video game. All right, so that's them. Any questions about the Muslim states? Real quickly, how did the Ottoman Empire sultans demonstrate their power and authority? How did they do it through culture or architecture or art or however they did it? Mini portraits, right? And what about the Mughal Empire?
Should I say it?
Yeah, go ahead and say it.
Taj Mahal.
Yeah, and Taj Mahal would be an example of what? Art? Architecture?
Architecture.
Architecture, right. Grand architecture. Taj Mahal. Not a palace, by the way. Tomb. Okay, cool. Any questions about the Muslim states? All right, sweet. We're going at a good pace. Hopefully we can do this in less than the 2 hours that we have allotted. I think we can. I want to, and I know you do, so. All right. So, moving along. One of the big themes in the, did we ever talk about Louis XIV and Philip?
Yeah.
Like, on the study hall? Or did you just talk about it with the?
I mean, you briefly.
So it's just like tiny bit.
Let me make sure. I don't want to actually skim over this and skip it for YouTube. Oh yeah, no, we didn't cover it in the study hall, so I'll cover that real quick. One of the major themes of this early modern era, 1450 to 1750, is going to be increased power of the monarch and centralization, except for one place, actually two, but one place is going to be an exception right here, and also the Netherlands too. But those two places are going to be the exceptions to this centralization theme. So centralization, what does that mean exactly?
Unified political entity.
Yes, so we're not talking like a bunch of like local feudal kingdoms or tiny empires or city-states. We're talking about one single state that's unified under one government. In this case, it's going to be mostly monarchs. All right, so that's going to be a major theme here. So again, not local rulers, but a unified central authority. And overwhelming majority of them are going to be monarchs in this case. All right, so the old feudal system, actually it's still going. The hierarchy, we don't care about these right now. Top two. Monarch. Nobles. Is the monarch dependent on the nobles?
Yes.
Yes, he is. How is he or she dependent on the nobles?
Provide them army.
Okay, yeah. So they're going to contribute troops, right? When they're what do they call it? When they call for it's fealty is the term for the allegiance. There's a term for like when they call on them for aid. I can't remember what it is. Whatever it is. When they call them for aid, they're supposed to send soldiers. All right. And then what else do they rely upon them for? Taxes. So are people like dishing out money, printed money in Europe at the time?
No.
Not really. What is most of their currency in the form of?
Grains.
Grains, yes. Good, you guys know this. Well done. So that's definitely the monarch has the authority, but at any point that they want to, they could just say no, right? And potentially ally against the monarch and overthrow them. Could that possibly happen?
Yes.
Yeah, it happened plenty of times. So a lot of the monarchs of Europe don't like that idea. So they're going to try to take some of that authority from the nobles and give it exclusively to them. So things like the right to tax, things like having a standing army loyal just to the monarch and not spread amongst all the lords. All right, and that's going to greatly enhance their power. So two monarchs in Europe. Should I talk about any outside of Europe? No. Oh, kind of. The Sultan. Well, whatever. Two monarchs in Europe are going to start this process. So who's my monarch in Spain and who's my monarch in France? Boom.
Louis XIV
Louis XIV.
and
Philip II, yeah. So who's in Spain?
Philip.
Which one's in Spain?
Philip.
Philip, yeah. All right, and he's the 16th century, and Louis is the 17th century. We'll talk more about them in Euro, but let's actually get some info on them now. All right, so Philip is going to control his state of Spain through control of religion. So what is he going to do in Spain? Julia tried to talk about it, but then she got the Inquisition thing screwed up. What happens in Spain specifically that's going to strengthen the monarch's control of that state in particular? Dunno?
Rally the Christians to kick out the Jews.
Okay, there you go. That's actually Ferdinand Isabella, but yes, okay. It does have to do with Christianity and unifying Christianity. So before him, Ferdinand and Isabella are going to unite the Christians of Spain against the Muslims that are there from the old Umayyad invaders, the Moors, yep, kicking them out. That's called Reconquista. But there's still a bunch of, well, actually, tell me, who might be in Spain that is not a Catholic in the 1500s? Jews, yes. Those are there from the old Jewish diaspora, absolutely. Who else might still be there?
Moors?
Yeah, you still got some Arabic or Muslim people there, right? What else might be there in the 1600s that the Catholics might not want to be there?
Protestants.
Yeah, any Protestants. Not that there's a ton of them, but there are some. Okay. So what is Philip going to begin using against these Protestants, Jews, and Moors, leftover Moors, Muslims, essentially? You say, welcome, guys. Just be nice, and you guys can stay.
It's the Spanish Inquisition.
Yes, this is where we start seeing the Inquisition being used, okay? I know we haven't talked about yet the Protestant Reformation. I think I did mention that, actually. The Council of Trent, for that huge 20-year meeting to decide that, no, they disagree with everything the Protestants said. Yeah. So at that point, they tell every Catholic monarch, just like Philip II, to get rid of all non-Catholics, right? And then they would use the Inquisition to do that. So he enforces two things. He enforces what's called the Index of Prohibited Books. Anybody know what that is?
Basically, Protestant and scientific literature.
Wait, why scientific?
Because it might.
Against the Catholic Church.
Yeah, scientific ideas back then contradicted the Bible and the Catholic Church's position, so those were heretical, and so were Protestant books. So this Index of Prohibited Books was enforced. If you were caught with those books, you could be punished by imprisonment or death. All right, and then you guys already mentioned the Inquisition. What's the Inquisition do? It means to question. What's the Inquisition do?
Basically, a SWAT team.
It's kind of like a SWAT team without the guns. What's the Inquisition do?
Internal force.
Oh, I give it a whole explanation about how they did all these things to these people, and you don't remember any of it?
They basically like punish or kill anyone that isn't Catholic.
How though? It's more complex than just, oh, I'm gonna punish you.
They capture them and then torture them until they commit or they confess that they're a heretic.
Heretic, yep. So it isn't just like we catch you and imprison you. We catch you, and if we caught you, you're guilty. They catch you and they torture you till you confess, right? And anybody knows anything about torture, you're eventually going to confess to things you didn't do, so the torture stops. So they torture till they confess. Now their soul is clean. They can go home now?
No.
No, what happens?
Burned.
They
Crucifixion.
burn at the stake, right? Exactly. All right, so Index of Prohibited Books and the Spanish Inquisition are going to be used to chase out any non-Catholics. And you're like, well, how does that strengthen his power? Well, number one, the fact that he can order these things to happen, put it into law, use the Inquisition to chase out any non-Catholics, that's a large demonstration of one's authority. But also, if you remove, I'm not saying this is a good thing because it's actually a bad thing. If you remove all people that disagree with your beliefs, that's going to make you and your group that remains, and in this case Catholics, more unified because they all agree with each other essentially. So they're not worrying about them being heretics or mischievous because there's sort of a bond or trust that's put into place. So that's how Philip's going to enhance his power. Makes Spain almost entirely Catholic, and he also demonstrates he has the authority to enforce this Index of Prohibited Books and use the Inquisition against his at least religious enemies. All right, Louis XIV, more complicated, but we don't have too much time to go over exactly what he did. He's going to take the nobles who were sharing power, and he's basically going to say, no, that's all my power now. So, just like, actually it's very similar to what happened with the Mughal Empire with the Zamindars. So, what he's going to do is he's going to take these nobles that could be a threat to him, and he's going to say, all right, I'm not going to just like kill you, because then you'll just hate me and fight against me for sure. So he's actually going to enhance their, enhance power and wealth. And he's going to do that by including them in the government, the central government. So not only do they get to keep their old estates, their old manors, so they still are like the lords of that area, and they have local authority, so that stays, but they also gain central authority too. So he makes them part of the bureaucracy. Remember what a bureaucracy is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, part of the government, tax collecting, for example. But he also is going to put them into the military. So he's going to have one standing military that's loyal to him, but who do you think the generals and colonels and lieutenants are going to be?
The nobles.
Nobles, exactly. So he's going to make them loyal by enhancing their power. So they keep local authority, check, but they actually gain power. And again, what are the two major ways they gain power?
Central position.
Central positions, give me an example.
Tax.
Tax collectors, okay. So they're part of the bureaucracy, administration, all right? They're in the central government. That's more power and authority than they had before over just their territory. So they're part of the central government. So tax collecting is an example. And what was the other way that he's going to enhance his own power? Through the military.
The generals and...
Okay, they're going to be the officers, but is there going to be a bunch of troops he has to call from his fellow lords to come to his...
No.
No, what are they going to have now in France?
Just one.
One standing army. That's their job. They're professional soldiers loyal to the king. All right. So it's not like a janissary force necessarily, but it's a group of professional soldiers that are loyal to the king, not their individual lords. All right. So standing army plus nobles as officers, and that's going to go for a long time until Napoleon figures out it's stupid to just make officers nobles because some of them are idiots. It's better to promote people who are good at what they do. And that's why he starts wrecking everybody in Europe, along with the fact that he's really good himself. That's not until later, though. Okay. Do you understand Louis and Philip?
Yes.
All right. What's a Timar? Ooh, a land grant. Nice. Where? Ottoman Empire. To who?
Timurids.
Okay, they're called Timurids when they get it, but like, yeah, someone said soldiers. That's the reward for participating in. That's not the right word. Serving. Thank you. Serving in the Ottoman army. It's a land grant. But the problem was these Timurids, the people, are getting too powerful. They're like a new social class, and they're becoming too powerful themselves to the point that they might challenge these sultans. So what does he start doing? That the sultans start doing that limits their power. What does he do with these Timurs? He doesn't get rid of them, but what does he do with them?
Divides them.
Yeah, he starts dividing them. So instead of giving you like this huge chunk of land to get your own thing, he starts splitting it between them. And he also makes it so that they're not like continuous. Like you don't get a whole city, you get part of a city and the land out of it. So you don't like own that entire area. All right, so he's gonna start splitting these land grants to reduce power. And hey, you guys probably remember this. There was a Russian monarch who didn't like the boyars, the local rulers and nobles that had a lot of authority. Who was he?
Ivan
Yeah, Ivan the Terrible, Ivan the Fourth. And what's he going to do about these boyars that he doesn't like?
the Oberchina.
Oprachina, what's that?
Like a secret police force.
It's kind of like a secret police force in that he would go out and persecute and take the land and possessions and life of these boyars. So he's going to essentially wipe out boyar class, or at least a lot of it. And again, that's called the Oprachina Terror.
Bless you.
All right. So those are all examples of centralization. All right. So then we're going to talk about resistance to that, and then we'll take a brief break and finish after. So, who do I start with? I think I start with the Fronde and the Catalan revolts. Yes, I do. And the Gentry, and then Metacom and Zinga. Okay. All right. Not all nobles are going to take this line down. In fact, in Spain and in France, we're going to see examples of the nobles actively resisted, like took their armies, what they had of them, and tried to fight the forces of the monarch and the other nobles. All right, so there's two examples. They both go different ways. First one is the Catalan revolts during the 30 Years' War. All right, and the other one is, what's the one in France?
The Fronde.
The Fronde, yeah. Actually, I think they're both during the 30 Years' War. So in both cases, the nobles are very much tired of this 30 Years' War because it's very expensive. Cost them a lot of soldiers, a lot of money, a lot of death, a lot of famine, all these issues that come along with long, drawn-out wars. So some of them aren't too happy, especially the peoples of Catalonia, which is roughly this region right here. And that is Spain's most lucrative, wealthy, powerful province. All right, so losing these guys is bad. And it's going to be bad for Spain. So they're going to rise up against Spanish monarchy. And for the same reason, the French nobles are going to rise up against the French monarchy. All right, how does the Fronde go?
The rebellion loses.
The rebellion loses. You know what's important, though, is there was a very young prince at the time who got to see all this happening, who would later become a king and control these nobles. Louis XIV, yeah. So Louis XIV was but a wee little child when these were going on. And he remembered how his dad had to deal with these rebels and how they had to move and they were worried about losing and dying. So he's going to make sure when he's king, they're not able to do that. All right, so that's a big motivator for him. Regardless, what's going to happen here is a victory for the monarchy. So is that going to help or hurt noble power in France?
Hurt.
It's going to hurt, obviously, you lost. Actually, let me rephrase that. Help or hurt monarchical power?
Help.
The power of the monarch. That's going to help,
Help.
yeah. So up monarch. Spain, different. Very different result. The people of Catalonia, being on the border of France, get some help from France. How do we know that the French don't like the Spanish, by the way?
Because Spain is number one and they want to be number one.
That's true, but give me an actual example where they acted against Spain when they probably should have, at least theologically, helped them out. 30 Years' War, right? They joined the Protestant side just to take a piece of Spain, which they do successfully. So they help out the people of Catalonia. They are victorious, and what we're going to see here is some nobles of Cat victorious. So two negative developments here. Number one, Spain loses their best province, their most lucrative, wealthy province. Man, I can't speak. And what happens to monarchical power? Up or down? Yeah. And that's the end of Spain, slowly. And the beginning of France, slowly as well. All right, cool. So that's two examples. We have one more example that doesn't necessarily weaken the country, but it definitely weakens the monarch. All right, and that is, already circled it. Who's the country that succeeds in taking power from the monarch but not destroying the country itself?
Egypt.
Britain, yeah, England. You guys didn't know that. It's circled. Goodness sakes. I know my map's better than that. England. Did they talk about the English Civil War? No? Not at all? Like, wasn't in the notes?
Nope.
Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. So, English Civil War, 1642 to 1650 something. Can't remember the year. Mid-17th century. Here's how this one goes. So, we have a really rich merchant class that's self-made. They own property, they trade with the New World. They got really rich all by themselves, and they have a lot of power. They're not nobles, though. What is that called?
Gentry.
Gentry. You know that, at least. Gentry. So after a while, this gentry class, are they allowed to participate in the government and rule and have authority? No. Even though, after a while, they start becoming more wealthy and powerful than the nobles, right, that have this power and authority. So the gentry, not happy with that, all right? But they have a lot of money. So who's going to want to collect taxes from them? The monarch specifically, yes. But to do that, they have to be in parliament, but they can't join parliament because they're not nobles. So they're like, what's the problem here? So this is where parliament's going to change in European history. And this is at the beginning of the 17th century. I think it's under James I. Don't quote me, though. Parliament's going to change. So it was all nobles and clergy before. Members of the Anglican Church. No regular people. Right? Regular peeps. No regular people. Didn't happen. But if the king wants to tax them, he's got to have them in parliament so he knows who they are and they participate in the government, and then he can collect taxes, revenue from them. So they have to split parliament into two houses. So what happens to this? These nobles and clergy, what house do they become? There you go. You're like, oh, that's why. This becomes House of Commons. Sweet. Now the king can tax these people. Hooray! Yay for the monarch. Ooh, but bad for the monarch. Because who now has some authority and say in the government?
The people.
The regular people, right? And the gentry class are always changing. You always get new people who are rich and falling out of it. So it's going to be ever changing. But also, these guys are a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Stubborn, I guess? Because they earned it themselves. So they're not so willing to... It's one thing if you're handed a bunch of money in estates from your family, like your dad or your mom or whatever. You're like, oh, okay, that's cool. I don't mind giving up some of it or whatever. But it's different when you start from nothing and work your way up. You don't really just want to give away stuff. So these guys, it turns out, are going to be way more, what's the word I'm looking for? Miserly. Miserly means like penny pinchers, kind of.
Oh.
So they're not they're not so willing to give you money. All right. So when the monarch, later monarchs like Charles I, for example, starts blowing a lot of money on stuff for his estate and in wars against Scotland, they're going to be like, hey, you're bad with money. We don't want to give you any more. In fact, we want actually to change things so that you can't just collect taxes from us. We want to be able to say no, all right, because they couldn't technically say no at the time. That's what's going to start this English Civil War. All right, so I realize we've been talking about the monarchs and all that, but just know this. There is a monarch in the 1640s. His name is Charles I, and he's bad with money. Blows it on himself and his estate, blows it against the Scottish in a series of wars against them that didn't necessarily need to happen. So now the House of Commons is like, no. We don't want to just hand you money. You're wasting it. We want to be able to tell you no. All right? So how do you think the king, Charles I, likes this news, that the House of Commons wants the ability to tell him no? He's not going to like that. All right, so what he's going to do is, and I realize I'm explaining a really complicated event in a very short amount of time, but what he does when, so we got the gentry and House of Commons, they're in Parliament now. Charles I is bad with money, and they're like, no, we don't want to just hand you money anymore. We want the ability to say no. So Charles's response to that is going to be to not break up. When you disperse, I guess just disperse. He's going to try to end Parliament, and he's going to arrest some of these House of Commons members. All right, which is, well, I don't know if it's necessarily legal in England at the time, but they did not like it. So once Charles I attempts disband, that's the word I was looking for, attempts to disband and arrest the House of Commons, or at least certain members of them, how do you think the gentry are going to receive that? The message that they have to go home, and the ones that were really loud actually are going to be arrested. How do you think they're going to take that sit down like, oh, dang, we tried? No.
Protest.
No, they're more than protest. They're actually going to use their superior money and power to fight directly against the king. So they're going to build up their armies, and they're going to have some support from the nobles who also don't want the king doing as much as he does. And some nobles are going to stay loyal to the king. And you're going to have a fight between the gentry and some nobles versus the monarch and some nobles. All right. Who do you think wins? Why? Yeah, they do, and they prove to be more capable on the battlefield too. They've got a guy named Oliver Cromwell, who, by the way, turns out to be kind of a tyrant, but really good militaristically. And they're going to defeat the king's forces, and not only do they defeat them, they shock all of Europe when they declare him a traitor and decapitate him in public. And so that's never happened in Europe at the time. They're like, what? Regular people rose up, beat the king, and then chopped his head off. Like, they couldn't believe it. So I'm skipping a lot of events, like the period of time where Oliver Cromwell kind of ruled as a Republican authoritarian. We don't care about that. What we care about is the king in this conflict, this English Civil War. He loses his life, all right? And they do invite his son, Charles II, to come back and be king, but there's an asterisk on it. What do you think the asterisk on coming back to be the monarch is going to be? If they allow him to come back and rule, what is he going to have to do or not do, do you think?
The gentry could say no to him.
Yeah, exactly. So the gentry, the House of Commons, is going to have a lot more power and authority. So the monarch's going to lose power, and the Parliament, House of Commons, are going to gain power. All right, so that's an example of successful resistance against the monarchy. But that doesn't not in the case of Spain, that weakened them all around. This actually strengthens England because they're going to start passing a lot more laws that help the gentry do what they do best, and that is get rich and make good armies. All right, so that's what they're going to do. English Civil War, increase in power for the Parliament, decrease for the monarch. All right, English Civil War kind of makes sense a little bit?
Yeah.
All right, you don't even know all the details, just there's House of Commons. King said, give me more money. House of Commons said, we don't want to. They fought, King lost. Now House of Commons can say no. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Is that my only example of resistance in Europe? Yep, those are the two. The last two examples before we take our break are resistance to colonial powers, actually. So I got one in Angola. Actually, it's not that large. It's a union of states against the Portuguese. And we also have a fight here in the English colonies versus the American Indians there. So do you guys remember what the name of the conflict versus the settlers in the English colonies was? Metacom's War. It's also known as King Philip's War, by the way, because that was also his name. He was so friendly with the settlers at one point, he adopted their name, but then he got upset, obviously later, enough to go to war with them. And then he had Metacom's War, and that was the most destructive settler versus American Indian War, by the way, in English history. That's where there were heavy losses on both sides. The settlers ended up winning, but they lost a lot of towns and settlement homes and things like that. Okay, Metacom's War, example of resistance, unsuccessful, but resistance nonetheless, to colonial powers. And who was the resistor here in Angola, who actually was a really good diplomat, but couldn't muster up the numbers and technology to take on the Portuguese directly?
Oh, I was thinking of an N. I just forgot.
Yeah, It's Ana Nzinga. I'm sure it's pronounced something different in the region of Angola, but that's how my very American English is going to pronounce it. All right, and that's in the 16th century. And again, who's she leading resistance against?
The
Portuguese. I guess, again, unsuccessful, but they like putting in examples of resistance even if it doesn't work. I don't know why, but they just do. So, any questions about resistance to colonial powers? Cool, we'll do the society stuff after the break. Let's check back in 7 minutes. There's some African states that we're going to talk about real quick. We've got the Songhai or Songhai. Songhai or Songhai. Songhai. We have the Asante. Asante. As well as the Kingdom of the Congo. These are your major African states in the early modern era. So actually right down here. Okay. We have the Asante. Oops. Yes. And the Kingdom of the Congo. With a K. All right, cool. Songhai. They're going to, I'm just write the years, on the exact years of these. 1592. Yeah, they're the ones that get knocked out by Morocco. Correct. All right, so it's actually 1464 to 1592. Asante, 1620. I do believe there was some interference with the British and French colonial powers, but they still were able to maintain the rulers. 1957. And the Congo from the 16th to 19th centuries. All right. So I spell these names right while I got them up here. And Money Congo. All right. Okay, so Songhai, we'll do them first. This was in the last curriculum. These two were added this year. This is in the last year's curriculum. So Songhai, they're in West Africa. They're the ones that replace Mali, a declining Mali power. And they come out of the trade city of Gao. And that's in more of the eastern portion. And they're going to conquer what is essentially what was Mali and take over that area. So a couple things are the same. The things that are the same, but they're going to be enriched by the Trans-Saharan Trade Network trade. And what are the most lucrative commodities over here in West Africa? Slaves, gold, ivory, yeah. Slaves, gold, ivory, just like the Mali and for them Ghanis. But this is going to be the one difference. They are going to have Islam, just like Mali did, but what's the difference with Islam here?
They don't enforce it on the lower class?
Right. They're going to, well, that's going to be the same actually. Who do they enforce it on though? The elites, exactly. So before it was not enforced on anybody. Now it is enforced on the elites. So Askia the Great, one of the most influential and powerful rulers there, great. He's part of this program where they're going to force the elites, the wealthy people, or you can say the nobles, to convert to Islam. But why? Why would he force elites to convert to Islam? Why? No hands for that.
So they can
So they can have the Islamic government.
Okay, but like how does that enhance the power of the monarch?
Because Islam teaches to follow and obey the leader.
Yeah, exactly. If they're Muslim, right? Exactly. So if you have a Muslim ruler, you're supposed to obey that state hierarchy, right? And the whole reason for this again is to promote obedience to king, because that's part of Islam. If your ruler is Muslim, then you're supposed to adhere to that state hierarchy. Because if it's a Sharia or a Muslim government, it's supposed to be a good and virtuous government. All right, cool. All right, and then the Songhai, of course, are later going to fall because of a combination of the fault in the Trans-Saharan Trade Network and the invasion of Morocco into the, because they thought that they were wealthy, but they found out that the gold had pretty much run out. It was pretty much just the slave trade at that point. All right, so with the Asante, down here was now modern-day Ghana on the Ivory Coast. They're going to establish an empire. One of their greatest rulers was Osei or Osei Tutu, and their symbol of power isn't going to be a scepter. It's actually the golden stool of the Asante. So the monarch that holds and possesses that is the ruler of the Asante people. And they are going to do rather well. He's going to expand the state and reform the military. And again, they're going to be controlled by colonial powers later on, the French and the British, but they do still maintain their own rulers throughout most of that era. So they're going to have, of course, the golden stool, and they are also, much like the Songhay, going to profit from the slave trade, from slaves, ivory. I don't think they were as wealthy regarding gold, but I'm sure it was still present. All right, so slaves, ivory, gold. I think copper too, but they're pretty much just going to benefit from trading with Europeans for the most part in the area. And that's the Asante Empire kingdom. Got that?
Yep.
All right. And the, at least the religious unifier of the kingdoms of the Congo was Mani Congo in 1491. I realize that precedes the 16th century because they weren't yet large, but there was a group of Europeans that had already mapped out and explored and were establishing trade posts along this coast here. Who would that be?
Portuguese.
Portuguese, right. And the Portuguese are going to bring Catholicism, and after Mani Congo, the peoples of the Congo, in roughly this region here, are going to convert to Catholicism. So Catholics after contact with Portuguese. Remind me what the three motivations for Europeans to explore was.
Gold, glory, and
Converting people.
God.
Yes, there you go. Gold, glory, God, right. Remember, the gold is to get wealthy, the God is to missionary work to spread Christianity, and the glory is for those, I think I told you this, those conquistadors that would go in and they weren't like powerful lords in Europe, but if they conquered the area, they would get their own kingdom, their own feudal kingdoms. That was the glory. All right, cool. And also, the Portuguese are going to, of course, begin trading slaves with them, but it already existed. There was already a trade network regarding slaves, just like in West Africa, who had been trading slaves with each other and with the Arabs for, like 500 years at that point. There was already an existing slave labor market. Although obviously the Portuguese coming in with their wealth and purchasing the slaves is going to enhance that. But we already know that. So Portuguese enhance an already existing slave trade. And they knew it already existed because one of the first contacts, this guy named Afonso, who was one of the kings of the Congo, he's going to mention their slave markets. Letters to Portuguese. Again, letting them know they have these slave markets, and then the Portuguese are, of course, interested in purchasing those slaves later on. So those are the African states of the early modern era. Songhay, Asante, and Congo in these three regions, in West Africa and Central Africa. Guys, Giggity got that? Sweet. So we move through the other ones pretty quickly, because it's almost summarizing what we already know. So, examples of syncretism in the early modern era, of course, which is when you are mixing local beliefs with these major religions like Christianity or Islam. So where's my the West Africans that are brought over to the Americas, especially in the Caribbean and what is now the South, like Louisiana area? What's the syncretism that's going on there?
Vodou.
Yeah, the Vodun beliefs brought over from Africa, plus what? Christianity. And what are they going to borrow from Christianity and incorporate into their Vodun beliefs?
Like candles and...
Yeah, candles, altars, exactly. All right. What about in Africa and South Asia, the more mystical and spiritual, dance-centered, chant-centered, less reading liturgical Islam? Sufism, yes. And that, of course, is going to be led by a Sufi, which is a mystical or spiritual leader. And you're going to want to know where these were popular. So again, this is going to be in the Caribbean and the Americas, more so the Caribbean though. And this is going to be popular where? I already mentioned it.
Southeast Asia.
South Asia. Oh, Southeast Asia too. So Southeast Asia. And Africa. All right, so that's syncretism. All right, as these religions spread, obviously. Okay, cool. Next up on the list of stuff are... I thought I did literature next. Even if I don't, I'm doing literature next. So, why are especially Europeans, but also Chinese, and also Ottoman, Timars and whatnot, how come people are so much more easily able to afford luxury goods like art and literature?
Exchange and all that.
What?
The Columbian exchange and everything.
Oh, cool. So who got wealthy from this triangular trade, Columbian exchange thing?
European.
Europeans, yes. And then, of course, you already have decently wealthy land empires. All right, so what are they doing with this extra wealth they've got to show how wealthy they are? Besides building grand architecture and paint for portraits. Besides that.
Playwrights.
What?
Playwrights, basically.
Okay, they're hiring people to write plays. Okay, cool. What are some examples of some playwrights?
Shakespeare.
Nice. So we got Shakespeare, Cervantes for Spanish, Shakespeare for English, obviously. So they're going to be patronized. Well, who was a major patron of Shakespeare? Someone say
Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah. Patron? And again, the reason why we have wealthy, especially Europeans at the time, this gentry class, back there, I'm going to kick you out in about 5 seconds. You'll shut up. Thanks. So Elizabeth were patrons, or sorry, she was a patron of like Shakespeare, and they're going to be wealthy because of this exchange system. So it's going to be mostly gentry and other merchant class folks across the world are going to be enriched by triangular trade. All right. So that's literature. Speaking of literature, how does the Renaissance impact literature? Because obviously you got a bunch of old Greek and Roman stuff coming over from the Middle East and North Africa. How does that actually change the way people are writing and thinking and teaching?
They use the printing press and spread it out.
That's true. So, okay, all of this is going to be spread, including Renaissance works, yeah. Spread faster and more cheaply via printing press. Nice. Okay. What about literature, though, is going to change? It's going to shift from focusing on something to focusing on something else.
Oh, so it's going to be more humanism?
It's going to be more humanism?
It's
What
going
does
to
that
make it
mean?
more human-like. We're talking about more human and not more God and divine.
Okay, good. You said human like 5 times. There you threw God in there to mix it up. Okay, cool. So Renaissance is going to result in literary works and education centered around humanism. So before we even talk about what that is, obviously the word humans in it. Why all of a sudden is humanism going to pop up, this focusing on regular human people rather than like the divine or superheroes, essentially? Why is that going to be popular during this era when these other classical texts are coming back?
Because of new ideas and that really took away from the Catholic Church and the divine and everything else.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. But like, what about these Greek and Roman texts cause them to, question it or move away from the Catholic Church and this whole divine perfection focus? Okay, so skepticism, first of all, yeah, okay. So this is going to be partially pushed forward by skepticism from the Greeks and Romans. But also this too. Did they have Christianity back in the days of ancient Greece and the majority of ancient Rome? No, they did not. So they were focused a lot more on regular human and political life than they were about God or the afterlife or things like that. All right, so it's what's called a secular tone. Secular meaning worldly. Not focused on the afterlife, but focused on this life right here. That's what the Greeks were focused on. That's what most of the Romans were focused on as well. So not only skepticism, but secularism. Remind me what secular means? Non-religious, worldly, exactly. So again, instead of having these figures that are either religious or divine or perfect, it's going to be very regular humans. So they're going to be the subjects of art, the subjects of writings, of stories. Stories that usually had like some meaning about, how to get to heaven or how to become a perfect human or whatever. But now they're going to be much more regular, like, oh, here's a criminal and a prostitute and a doctor and a liar, right? And here's them going on this adventure trying not to die from the Black Death, right? That's basically what the Decameron was. So that's what writing styles, how they're going to evolve in the Renaissance. We talk more about that in AP Euro, but that's how the Greco-Roman texts are going to influence and change literature. All right, that's covered. Next up is, we do Little Ice Age, disruption. Oh yeah, the other ways to demonstrate power. Actually, so I said no earlier, but I forgot that's actually a part of this too. So we mentioned we've got monarchs that are patronizing art and plays, but we also have some examples that we've already covered before, but we can just sum them up. Monarchs demonstrating power. power and wealth. All right, so examples of architecture. Give me a monarch and a building or a piece of architecture that embodies this.
Palace of Versailles from Louis XIV of
Yeah,
France.
Versailles, Louis XIV of France. Absolutely. Almost bankrupts France doing it.
Ivy the Terrible in the Winter Palace.
Okay, it was actually Peter the Great, but yes.
Oh.
Peter the Great. Remember, unless somebody's dying horribly, it's probably not, wait, no. Yeah, unless somebody's dying horribly, it's probably not Ivan the Terrible. All right, Peter the Great, Winter Palace. Nice Eurocentric examples, guys. Jeez. What about some non-Europeans?
I forgot the guy who made it, but.
Oh my goodness.
Taj Mahal, Shah Jahan.
There you go.
Mughal Empire.
Okay, cool. So we got the, that's also architecture. So we have the Mughal, and we got the Taj Mahal. What about portraits? Mini portraits where? Ottoman Empire? Who? What position? Sultans. Nice.
In China, the big portraits.
Of who?
Emperor Kangxi.
There you go. So Qing, life-size portraits. Ottoman, miniature paintings. Nice. Okay. So in this era, from 1300 to 1850, there's a cooling of the globe, a natural cooling of the globe. So it gets very, very cold up here in the north. You have a lot more ice form. Winters are longer. You can't grow crops as well. Certainly not this far north. You can't even grow crops at all for the most part. And then it's still growing crops in these regions, but they don't last as long, not as long around the year. So what is this era called? And what's the impact on the populations up here in the north?
The Little Ice Age, and it results in like abandonment of settlements up there.
Nice. Little Ice Age. I should have written it over here. I should have point. The internet people are going to hate that. Oh well. Little Ice Age. And again, so people up in northern territories are going to have to move or die because they can't grow either food at all or they can't grow it as throughout as much of the year. So what are some examples of settlements that had to be abandoned to go further south?
Greenland, Iceland, and Norway.
Nice. Okay. Greenland, Iceland, Norway, even Scotland up there in northern England, the northern part of the British Isles. Scotland are going to abandon settlements to move south or the United States. Or, well, the colonies anyway. So, this is when a lot of people end up going to the colonies because, well, they have to. Either there's religious wars over here fighting and dying, or they're dying of starvation and freezing. In fact, in England, the Thames River is going to freeze over a couple times completely, which doesn't happen. All right, and lastly, we also have some examples of social unrest, usually because of either too many taxes or because of the loss of common land rights. So, with the enclosure movement, they're kicking peasants off. They normally had the right to use the land as they pleased, as long as they paid their corvée labor, their labor taxes. But in England, in the 16th century, there's a rebellion because so many peasants have been displaced. They aren't happy. They want things to change. They want their common land rights protected. What is the name of that rebellion?
Kett's Rebellion.
Kett's Rebellion, right. Boom, and that's going to be an anti-enclosure rebellion. And again, they're losing their common land rights. I think I explained that in the study hall, but I can't remember if I did. Did I talk about the enclosure movement in the study hall?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and what about an example where colonists are being deprived of resources because the Europeans, so specifically is going over here, because the Europeans are using those resources to fight against each other in Europe and across the globe.
Boston bread.
Boston bread riots, yes. That's in the 1710s. All right, and that's opposed resource misuse. I'm totally off the grid here. I just realized this is the line too. Opposed resource misuse. Nice. That's anti-enclosure rebellion. If you can't see it on the video later. And lastly, we have a peasant rebellion in southern Japan due to increased tax hikes to pay for fortifications for the ports, because they're starting to ban foreigners. Now they're really going to ban foreigners after this one. What is that 1837 rebellion against the Tokugawa shogunate called? Shimabara. And what's the impact of that?
They
They isolate themselves.
the isolation.
Yeah, they finalized what they're already beginning, that Sakoku isolation period, at least by 1639. So Shimabara is going to be a rebellion against Tokugawa taxes. And of course that's going to result in Japanese isolation, Sakoku. But why did they do that though? Why did they think that this in particular was an event in which they needed to close the Japanese off from the Western world? They'd already kind of initiated this process, but now they're like, yep, for sure. Why?
Because the people that rebelled were Catholic, and they thought that the Catholic influence caused them to rebel.
Yep, they thought foreign influence and ideas were causing unrest in a relatively peaceful Tokugawa central state. So that's it, bye. There's only a couple topics though. So who was if you remember, because in Southeast Asia, the women ran the markets, which surprised a lot of Muslim and European merchants when they got there. And some of them even had their own businesses and ships. What was the one example of a lady in Jakarta or Indonesia that had that?
Anna Nzinga, something like that?
No, close though. It was Niageti. All right. You're thinking of the African lady who was a diplomat with the Portuguese. How about there was one group of women in the Muslim world that had some influence on the Sultan, whether they were family members or like when they were the mother, for example.
Imperial Harem.
Yeah, the Imperial Harem of the Ottoman Empire. So it's not, sometimes they would rule as like queen regents type thing, like if the Sultan was too young or whatever, they would temporarily rule for them. But they also, of course, had a direct connection with the Sultan, being like, either the mother or the wife or whatever. And there was actually a title called the Valid Sultan, which is the official mother of the Sultan. So they had their own protection and somewhat of a say, depending on the particular Sultan, in politics. But also, women in the Ottoman Empire had some property rights too, which was rare in the Muslim world, just the world in general back then. So yeah, that was some of the advances in power for women in period 2.